The rain fell in relentless sheets across the cemetery, darkening the granite headstones to the color of midnight. William Blackwood stood alone beneath a black umbrella, his weathered face impassive as water cascaded from the taut fabric and spilled onto the shoulders of his charcoal suit. The minister had long since departed. So had the modest gathering of mourners who had come to bid farewell to Jack Holloway. Only William remained, 68 years of life etched into the lines around his eyes, the rain mingling with what might have been tears on his leathery cheeks. 50 years since he had last set foot in Shadowcrest. Half a century since he had fled this town, tucked away in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, with its perpetual mist and secrets as ancient as the towering pines that surrounded it. He had sworn never to return, yet here he stood. The casket before him gleamed with unnatural brightness against the sodden earth, polished walnut reflecting the occasional flash of distant lightning. Inside lay the remains of the only true friend he had ever known. Jack Holloway, fellow Vietnam veteran, blood brother, the man who had saved his life in the steaming jungles of a foreign land, only to die alone in his cabin on the outskirts of Shadowcrest. An accident, they said. A heart attack while hunting, natural causes. William shifted his weight, the movement sending a familiar pain shooting through his left knee, a souvenir from a Viet Cong bullet that had found its mark in 1971. The rain hammered against his umbrella with increasing ferocity, but he made no move to leave. His eyes remained fixed on the casket, narrowed with something more than grief. Something about this felt wrong. Jack had been the picture of health at 67, a lifelong outdoorsman with the constitution of an oak tree. Heart attacks did not simply claim men like Jack Holloway. The funeral director had approached William earlier, voice hushed with practiced sympathy, asking if he wished to view the body one last time before the burial. William had nodded, following the small man into a private viewing room. What he had seen there had confirmed his suspicions. The mortician had done an admirable job, but William had spent too many years looking at death to be fooled. The strange bruising around the throat, the unnatural angle of the neck concealed by the high-collared shirt, the peculiar pattern of wounds on the forearms, almost like claw marks, hastily covered with makeup. Jack Holloway had not died of natural causes. He had been murdered. Thunder rumbled across the valley, closer now, the sound stirring something deep in William's chest. An answering growl, primal and unbidden, formed in the back of his throat. He swallowed it down, disturbed by the unfamiliar sensation. Perhaps it was simply the stress of the day, the grief, the long flight from Arizona, the strain of returning to the place that held so many painful memories. He felt a presence behind him, the faintest shift in the air pressure that his combat-trained senses registered before his conscious mind could process it. William turned, his movements fluid despite his age and injuries, the defensive stance automatic even after all these years. A woman stood watching him from beneath a nearby oak tree, unmoved by the rain that soaked her silver hair and plastered it against her temples. She wore no coat over her simple dark dress, seemingly indifferent to the cold November downpour. Her posture was straight, proud, belying what must have been at least 60 years of life. But it was her eyes that caught and held William's attention. Even from this distance, he could see they were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold, regarding him with an intensity that sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. She did not look away when their eyes met. Instead, a sad smile touched her lips, as though she recognized him, as though she had been waiting. William felt his heart rate quicken, another growl forming unbidden in his chest. Something about this woman triggered warnings in the primitive part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through jungle warfare and decades as a police detective afterward. Danger. He took a step toward her, driven by an instinct he did not understand. Lightning flashed, momentarily painting the scene in harsh white light, and in that instant, William could have sworn her eyes reflected the light like an animal's would. Then darkness returned, and when his vision adjusted, she was gone. The cemetery was empty once more, save for the rain and the dead. William remained motionless, scanning the tree line, unsettled by the encounter. Had he imagined her? Was grief playing tricks on his mind? Or was there something more sinister at work in Shadowcrest? He turned back to Jack's casket, placing a hand on the rain-slicked wood. "I will find out what happened to you," he promised, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Whatever it takes." The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scents of the forest beyond the cemetery walls. Pine, earth, decay, and something else. Something wild and musky that stirred ancient memories William had spent decades trying to forget. His nostrils flared, taking in information with a clarity that should have been impossible for a human. For the briefest moment, he was no longer standing in a cemetery in Oregon. He was crouched in the underbrush of a Vietnamese jungle, the smell of blood and gunpowder thick in the air, every sense heightened to supernatural sharpness as he tracked the enemy through the darkness, as he hunted. William shook his head violently, dispelling the vivid flashback. These episodes had been occurring with increasing frequency over the past few months. His therapist had diagnosed them as PTSD, prescribing meditation and medication. But this felt different, more visceral, more real. He folded his umbrella and walked away from the grave, his footsteps leaving deep impressions in the sodden earth. The caretaker would fill in the plot once he was gone. William could not bear to watch as they lowered his friend into the ground. The parking lot was empty except for his rental car, a nondescript sedan that gleamed wetly under the single flickering streetlight. William slid behind the wheel, his tall frame folding with the careful movements of a man accustomed to managing chronic pain. He started the engine but made no move to drive, instead watching raindrops race down the windshield, merging and separating in chaotic patterns. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his inner pocket and extracted a folded piece of paper, the letter that had arrived at his Arizona home 3 weeks ago, postmarked from Shadowcrest. Jack's distinctive handwriting covered the page, the words sending a chill through William that had nothing to do with the rain seeping into his bones. "Bill, I know we haven't spoken in years, and that's on me. But something's happening here, something bad. It's connected to what happened that summer before Nam. The dreams have started again. I'm seeing things in the woods. I'm not the only one. People are going missing. I think I'm being watched. If you get this and I'm already gone, it means I was right. They found me. Remember what your grandfather taught us, the silver, the moon cycles. It wasn't just stories, Bill. Please come. You're the only one who will understand. You're the only one who can stop it. Blood calls to blood." The letter ended there, unsigned, as though Jack had been interrupted while writing it, or had heard something coming. William folded the paper carefully and returned it to his wallet. Jack had always been prone to flights of fancy, even in their youth, but he had never been paranoid, never delusional, and the reference to William's grandfather and those summer nights filled with tales of monsters and magic sent a tremor through his aged hands. Caleb Blackwood had been a strange old man, full of warnings about full moons and ancient bloodlines. William and Jack had spent countless evenings at the old man's cabin in the woods, enthralled by his stories of shapeshifters and ancestral curses, tales of the Blackwood legacy, of alphas and packs and the price of power. Childish nonsense, William had decided long ago. Fairy tales and superstition. He had embraced rationality, science, the tangible world of evidence and facts that had served him well through his career in law enforcement. Yet here he was, drawn back to Shadowcrest by the ghost of his past and the terrible suspicion that Jack had died because of something connected to those old stories. William put the car in gear and pulled away from the cemetery, wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. The road into town wound through dense forest, the headlights barely penetrating the gloom beneath the ancient trees. He drove slowly, alert for deer or other wildlife that might suddenly bound across his path. The forest pressed close on either side, watchful and secretive. William found himself scanning the shadows between the trees, searching for movement, for eyes reflecting his headlights. His heartbeat quickened, adrenaline flooding his system without apparent cause. His palms grew slick with sweat on the steering wheel. Fear. He was feeling fear, not the calculated assessment of danger that had guided him through combat and police work, but something more primordial. the terror of prey sensing a predator, which was absurd. He was a man nearing 70, true, but still fit and capable, armed with both a licensed handgun and decades of experience. What could possibly threaten him on this lonely road? The answer came in a flash of memory so intense it nearly caused him to swerve off the pavement. A moonlit night, the forest, running, the exhilaration of the hunt, blood in his mouth, the taste of raw meat, pack brothers loping alongside him, their fur silver in the moonlight. William jerked the wheel, pulling onto the shoulder of the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. He shut off the engine with trembling hands and sat in the sudden silence, broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof and his own ragged breathing. These were not his memories, could not be his memories, yet they felt as real as anything he had ever experienced, more real, somehow, than the life he had built for himself after leaving Shadowcrest. He massaged his temples, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Grief was doing this to him, grief and exhaustion and the emotional strain of returning to the place of his childhood. Nothing more. A sharp rap on the passenger window sent him reaching instinctively for the weapon beneath his jacket. William froze, hand halfway to his holster, as he recognized the face peering in at him through the rain-streaked glass. The woman from the cemetery. She stood perfectly still in the downpour, that same enigmatic smile on her lips, her amber eyes catching what little light filtered through the storm clouds. She made no threatening moves, simply waited, water streaming down her face and neck to soak the already drenched dress that clung to her slender frame. William hesitated, every instinct honed through decades of police work screaming caution. Yet something deeper, something he could not name, compelled him to reach across and unlock the passenger door. She slid into the seat beside him with fluid grace, bringing with her the sense of rain and pine and something wild and untamed. Up close, William could see that she was indeed around 60, though she carried her years with remarkable dignity. Her face, framed by that silver hair now darkened by the rain, held a timeless quality. High cheekbones and strong jaw, softened by full lips, currently curved in that same knowing smile. "William Blackwood," she said, her voice a low, melodious contralto, with the faintest hint of an accent he could not place. "You have been gone a very long time." William shifted in his seat, putting more distance between them, his hand still close to his concealed weapon. "Do I know you?" "No," she replied, seemingly unconcerned by his defensive posture. "But I knew your grandfather, and I know what you are, even if you have forgotten." A chill ran down William's spine that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothing. "My grandfather has been dead for 40 years. You would have been a child." She laughed, the sound rich and warm in the confined space of the car. "I am older than I appear, Mr. Blackwood. As are you, in many ways." William studied her face, searching for signs of deception or madness. He found neither, only that steady amber gaze that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "You were at the cemetery," he said finally, "watching me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because Jack Holloway was under my protection. His death is problematic." William felt a surge of anger cut through his confusion. "Problematic? Is that what you call murder these days?" Her expression did not change, but something dangerous flashed in those unusual eyes. "So you saw it too. The marks. The wounds that should not have been there." "I was a detective for 30 years, ma'am. I know the signs of violence when I see them." "Yes, your human occupation." She sighed, looking out at the rain-lashed forest beyond the windshield. "That explains much about why you have remained ignorant for so long, why the change has been delayed." "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but I've had a long day burying my oldest friend. So unless you have actual information about Jack's death, I suggest you get to the point or get out of my car." She turned those amber eyes back to him, and for an instant, William could have sworn they gleamed with an inner light, pupils contracting to vertical slits before returning to normal. "Your friend was killed by something not entirely human, Mr. Blackwood. something that has been hunting in these woods for generations, something that your grandfather fought, something that now hunts you." William snorted, even as a part of him responded to her words with instinctive dread. "Right. Let me guess. Werewolves? Vampires? The bogeyman?" "You joke because you are afraid," she said softly. "Because deep down, you remember the truth. You feel the change beginning, don't you? The heightened senses, the dreams, the hunger." William stiffened, his forced amusement evaporating. The dreams had been coming with increasing frequency over the past months, dreams of running on all fours through moonlit forests, of hunting, killing, devouring. Dreams so vivid he sometimes woke with the taste of blood in his mouth and dirt beneath his fingernails, though he lived alone in a locked apartment. "Who are you?" he asked again, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. "My name is Elena Vasile. I am the keeper of the covenant, the guardian of the boundary between your world and theirs, and you, William Blackwood, are the last of your bloodline, the only one who can end what is coming." William shook his head, refusing to engage with what was clearly the ramblings of a disturbed mind. "Look, Ms. Vasile, I don't know what delusion you're operating under, but I'm just here to find out who killed my friend. So unless you have actual evidence—" "Jack kept a journal," she interrupted, "hidden in his cabin, behind the loose stone in the fireplace, the same place your grandfather used to hide his silver bullets." William froze. The hiding place had been a secret between him, Jack, and his grandfather, a childhood hidey hole where they had stored treasures and forbidden items. No one else could have known about it. "What do you know about Jack's death?" he asked, his tone sharpening to the one he had used in countless interrogations. "I know he was killed 3 nights ago, during the waxing gibbous moon. I know his throat was torn out by teeth not meant to exist in this world. I know he died because he recognized what was hunting in these woods again, and he tried to warn you." She leaned closer, her scent filling his nostrils, triggering something primal in his brain. "I know he died because of what you are, William Blackwood. What you have always been, whether you acknowledged it or not." "And what exactly am I, according to your fairy tale?" Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp to be fully human. "You are Lupus Regalis, wolf royalty, the last alpha of the Blackwood pack, the bloodline that has guarded this territory for 300 years. William laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Lady, the only pack I ever ran with was my platoon in Vietnam. I'm just a retired cop with bad knees and a pension that barely covers my medical bills." "Is that why you can smell the deer that passed through here an hour ago? Why you can hear the heartbeat of the rabbit hiding in the underbrush 20 yards from this car? Why your eyes reflect light like a predator's when you think no one is watching?" William said nothing, his mind racing. The strange sensory acuity that had been developing over recent months, the way food had begun to taste too strong, too processed, his growing preference for rare meat, the restlessness that seized him during the full moon, driving him to pace his small apartment like a caged animal. "This is insane," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "No more insane than the dreams you've been having, the ones where you run on 4 legs instead of 2, where you hunt with fangs instead of firearms." William's head snapped up. "How could you possibly know about those?" "Because they are not dreams, William. They are memories, your blood awakening after decades of denial, your heritage reclaiming you as the moon grows full." "I don't believe in werewolves," William said flatly, even as a treacherous part of his mind whispered that it would explain so much. "What you believe is irrelevant. Reality does not require your consent." Elena reached out, her cool fingers brushing against his wrist where an old scar formed a perfect crescent moon. "This mark. Your grandfather gave it to you on your 18th birthday, did he not? Called it a family tradition?" William jerked his arm away, but not before feeling an electric shock at her touch, as though some current had passed between them. "How do you know these things?" "I told you. I knew Caleb Blackwood. He was preparing you for your inheritance before you ran away, before you rejected your nature and fled into the human world." Her voice softened, taking on an almost maternal tone. "He was trying to protect you, William, to prepare you for what would come. But you left, and the knowledge died with him. William closed his eyes, memories flooding back. His 18th birthday, the strange ceremony in his grandfather's cabin, the silver knife, the chanted words in a language he did not understand, the crescent-shaped wound that never fully healed, leaving a scar that sometimes seemed to throb during the full moon. He had dismissed it all as the eccentricities of an old man clinging to outdated superstitions, had laughed it off with Jack the next day. And then Vietnam had come, the draft sweeping them both away from Shadowcrest and into the green hell of Southeast Asia. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I believe any of this, William said slowly, opening his eyes to find her watching him with that same unnerving intensity. What does it have to do with Jack's murder? Everything, Elena replied. The creature that killed your friend is the same one that has hunted your family for generations, the same one that drove your pack into hiding, the same one that your grandfather fought to his last breath. And what creature is that exactly? In the old country, they called it strigoi, vampire in your language, though that word has lost its meaning through Hollywood and cheap fiction. The reality is far worse than any film could capture. William should have laughed, should have dismissed her as insane and driven away. Yet something in her tone, in those ancient eyes, gave him pause. You're telling me Jack was killed by a vampire. I am telling you he was killed by a creature that feeds on blood and life force, that can appear human when it wishes, that has been hunting your bloodline specifically because your kind is the only real threat to its existence. Elena's gaze hardened. The same creature that will come for you next, now that you have returned to Shadowcrest. Why would anything hunt me? I'm just an old man. You are the last alpha of a werewolf bloodline that has kept this territory safe for centuries. Your grandfather was a powerful protector. He drove the strigoi into hiding, wounded it so badly it took decades to recover. Now it has returned, sensing your grandfather's power finally awakening in you. William shook his head, unable to process what she was saying. It was too fantastic, too far removed from the rational world he had inhabited his entire adult life. Yet even as he rejected it intellectually, something deeper, more instinctive, resonated with her words. The dreams, the heightened senses, the strange hunger. If any of this were true, he said cautiously, why am I only feeling these changes now? I'm 68 years old, for God's sake. Elena nodded, as though she had expected the question. Your grandfather bound your wolf nature before you left for the war, a temporary measure meant to protect you until you returned and could be properly trained. But you never came back. The binding spell was only designed to last a few years, yet your denial was so strong, your rejection of your heritage so complete, that it held for decades. Her expression grew troubled. But no binding can last forever, especially not with the bloodline running as thin as it has. The wolf in you is awakening out of necessity, out of survival. The moon is calling you home, William Blackwood. William rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted beyond words. This conversation had veered so far into the realm of fantasy that he could barely follow it. Yet he could not deny the conviction in Elena's voice, nor the way her words seemed to stir something ancient and powerful within him. So what am I supposed to do with all this information? He asked finally. Hunt down this strigoi with silver bullets and wooden stakes? First, you must fully awaken. Claim your heritage. Become what you were always meant to be. Elena reached into a pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object, holding it out to him on her palm. A ring, old silver, tarnished with age, bearing a crest William recognized with a jolt of shock. A wolf's head surrounded by ancient runes, the same symbol that had adorned his grandfather's signet ring, the same symbol that had been carved into the mantel of the old cabin fireplace. This belonged to your grandfather, Elena said softly. He entrusted it to me before his death, to give to you when the time came, when you were ready to accept the truth. William stared at the ring, memories cascading through his mind. his grandfather wearing it every day of his life. The way it had caught the firelight during those long evenings of storytelling, the way the old man had twisted it thoughtfully whenever speaking of family legacy and responsibility. "I cannot force you to believe, William," Elena continued, still holding out the ring. "You must come to the truth in your own time, your own way. But Jack Holloway died because he discovered that truth, because he recognized what was hunting in these woods again. The journal will tell you everything he learned." She placed the ring on the dashboard between them. "Tonight is the full moon, the first since your return to Shadowcrest. You will feel the call more strongly than ever before. When you do, when you can no longer deny what you are, put on the ring. It will help you control the shift, help you remember who you are during the change." William made no move to take the ring, still struggling with the implications of everything she had said. "And if I refuse? If I get back in my car right now and drive out of Shadowcrest, never to return?" Elena's expression turned grave. "Then the creature that killed Jack will continue to hunt. More will die, and eventually it will find you, wherever you hide. Your blood calls to it, William, the blood of the Alpha it has hated and feared for generations." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the car roof and the distant rumble of thunder. William studied the woman beside him, searching for any sign of deception, any indication that this was an elaborate hoax or the ramblings of a mentally ill person. He found none, only that steady amber gaze that seemed to contain centuries of knowledge and sorrow. "I need to think," he said finally. "I need time to process all this." Elena nodded, reaching for the door handle. "Time is the one luxury we do not have, but I understand. The mind must catch up to what the blood already knows." She opened the door, pausing with one foot on the wet gravel of the roadside. "When you are ready, come to the old apothecary shop on Willow Street. I will be waiting." She stepped out into the rain, seeming not to notice or care as it immediately began to soak her once more. Before closing the door, she leaned down, fixing him with those remarkable eyes one last time. "One more thing, William. The binding that has suppressed your true nature for so long has also protected you. As it fails, as the wolf awakens, you will be vulnerable in ways you cannot imagine. The Strigoi will sense your awakening. It will come for you. Be careful whom you trust. Not all monsters look the part." With that cryptic warning, she closed the door and walked away, disappearing into the rain-shrouded forest with unnatural speed. Within seconds, she had vanished from view entirely, leaving William alone with his turbulent thoughts and a silver ring that seemed to grow heavier on the dashboard with each passing moment. William started the car but remained parked on the shoulder, watching the spot where Elena had disappeared into the trees. Her story was preposterous. Werewolves, vampires, ancient blood feuds. It belonged in the pages of a horror novel, not in the real world of DNA evidence and forensic science he had inhabited throughout his career. And yet, he lifted his wrist, studying the crescent-shaped scar his grandfather had given him half a century ago. It seemed to throb with a dull heat, more noticeable than it had been in years. And now that his attention was focused on it, he realized other changes in his body as well. The chronic pain in his knee, constant companion for decades, had faded to a distant whisper. His vision, which had required reading glasses for the past 15 years, seemed preternaturally sharp, picking out individual raindrops as they struck the windshield. And the smells. God, the smells. The rich, loamy scent of wet earth, the sharp tang of pine resin, the musky odor of a fox that had passed by recently. Information flooding his brain through sensory channels that should not have been so acute in a man his age. William shook his head, trying to clear it. He needed facts, evidence, not wild tales spun by a strange woman in the rain. Jack's cabin, the journal she had mentioned. That, at least, was something tangible he could investigate, if it existed at all. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road, heading deeper into the forest where Jack's property lay. As he drove, William found himself acutely aware of the weight of the silver ring on the dashboard. He made no move to touch it, yet he could not escape the feeling that it was watching him, waiting. The Holloway cabin appeared through the rain as William rounded a bend in the narrow forest road. It was much as he remembered it from his youth, a sturdy structure of dark logs with a wide front porch and a stone chimney climbing up one side. Yellow police tape crisscrossed the front door, fluttering in the wind like tattered ribbons. William parked beside the county sheriff's cruiser, already occupying the muddy drive. He had called ahead to the local authorities, identifying himself as a former police detective and close friend of the deceased. The sheriff, a man named Tanner, whom William had never met, had grudgingly agreed to meet him at the cabin to discuss the case. As William approached the porch, the front door opened, revealing a tall man in a tan uniform with a 5-pointed star on his chest. Sheriff Tanner was younger than William had expected, perhaps 40, with close-cropped brown hair and the watchful eyes of a man who had seen combat. A fellow veteran, William surmised, recognizing the bearing. "Mr. Blackwood," Tanner said, extending a hand. "Sheriff Daniel Tanner. Sorry about your friend." William shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way the sheriff's gaze lingered a bit too long on his face, as though searching for something. "Appreciate you meeting me, Sheriff. I know this is irregular." Tanner shrugged, holding the door open for William to enter. "Not every day we get a retired big city detective in our neck of the woods. Figured you might have insights worth hearing." The interior of the cabin was dim, illuminated only by gray light filtering through rain-streaked windows. William paused just inside the doorway, assailed by a barrage of scents that nearly overwhelmed him. Blood, fierce sweat, the lingering odor of death, familiar from countless crime scenes, and something else, something fetid and unnatural that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "We've cleared most of the scene," Tanner was saying, oblivious to William's sensory overload. "Coroner came and went. Said it was a heart attack, but between you and me—" He trailed off, watching William's face. "You smell it too, don't you?" William snapped his attention back to the sheriff, suddenly wary. "Smell what?" "Death," Tanner replied simply. "Not the natural kind. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Mr. Blackwood. I know what a body looks like when something's been feeding on it." William studied the younger man with new interest. "The coroner's report said natural causes." "The coroner's an idiot who hasn't left his office in 20 years. He ruled from photographs. I was first on scene." Tanner moved deeper into the cabin, pointing to dark stains on the polished wood floor. "Found him there. Throat torn out. Claw marks on his arms and chest. Blood everywhere." He turned back to William, expression grim. "Something killed your friend, Mr. Blackwood. Something that walks on 4 legs most of the time, but maybe not all the time." William felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying, Sheriff?" "I'm saying Shadowcrest has secrets, old ones, the kind folks don't talk about to outsiders." Tanner ran a hand through his short hair, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. "Your name means something in this town. Blackwood. Your grandfather was a respected man, respected and feared." "You knew my grandfather?" "Of him. My father was friends with him. Used to take me up to his cabin when I was a boy." Tanner's gaze grew distant with memory. "I remember him telling stories about the old days, about protectors and hunters and things that lived in the deep woods, things that only came out when the moon was full." William's mouth had gone dry. First Elena with her talk of werewolves and vampires, now the sheriff hinting at the same impossible things. Had the entire town gone mad? Or was he the one who had been blind all these years? "Sheriff, with all due respect, I'm here to investigate a murder, not trade ghost stories." Tanner nodded, seeming to come back to himself. "Fair enough. Take a look around. Jack's personal effects are over there on the table. Family's coming to collect them tomorrow." He moved toward the door. "I'll wait outside. Give you some privacy with your friend's things." When the door closed behind Tanner, William stood motionless in the center of the cabin, breathing in the complex tapestry of scents. Beneath the blood and death, he could detect Jack's familiar presence. Gun oil, pipe tobacco, the particular brand of bourbon his friend had favored. It was like having a conversation with a ghost. He moved to the large stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the main room. It was identical to the one in his grandfather's cabin, right down to the wolf head crest carved into the central stone of the mantel. William ran his fingers over the ancient symbol, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. Pride, belonging, heritage. Kneeling, he examined the hearth, looking for the loose stone Elena had mentioned, the hiding place from his childhood. His fingers found it almost immediately, muscle memory guiding him to the right spot. The stone shifted under his touch, revealing a small cavity behind it. William reached in, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. His fingers closed around something solid, a book. He withdrew it carefully, brushing away decades of dust and ash. A leather-bound journal, the cover worn smooth with handling. Jack's initials were burned into the lower right corner. J.H. William opened it with trembling hands, finding pages filled with his friend's familiar slanted handwriting. Dates, observations, drawings. The most recent entry was from just 4 days ago, the day before Jack died. It's back. Saw it again last night at the edge of the property. Watching the house. Watching me. Not a normal animal. Too big. Too aware. Eyes like fire in the darkness. The dreams getting worse. Blood everywhere. Children screaming. The same nightmares from before Nam. Before everything went to hell. Called Bill today. Left a message. Hope he comes. Hope it's not too late. The old stories are true, all of them. Caleb was right. God help us. He was right about everything. William closed the journal, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Jack had seen something. Something that frightened a Vietnam veteran badly enough to reach out to a friend he hadn't spoken to in decades. He stood, tucking the journal into his jacket pocket, and returned to the fireplace. If Elena was right about the journal, what else might she be right about? William reached into the cavity again, his fingers probing deeper into the darkness. They touched something cold and metallic. He drew it out slowly, already knowing what he would find. A small wooden box, ornately carved with the same wolf head symbol. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay 6 silver bullets, tarnished with age, but still gleaming dully in the dim light. Beside them, a folded piece of yellowed paper. William opened it carefully, recognizing his grandfather's spidery handwriting. For William, when he returns, when he remembers silver for the Strigoi, or the blood for the binding, moon for the awakening, the pack endures. William sat back on his heels, the box cradled in his hands, a roaring in his ears that had nothing to do with the storm still raging outside. It was too much, too many coincidences, too many impossible things aligning into a pattern he could no longer ignore. The scar on his wrist throbbed painfully now, a steady pulsing heat that seemed to spread up his arm and into his chest. William gasped, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. His vision blurred, then sharpened with unnatural clarity. Colors became more vivid, shadows retreated, revealing details that should have been invisible in the dim light. And the smells. Dear God, the smells. Each distinct scent in the cabin separated into its component parts, creating a 3-dimensional map in his mind. He could smell the sheriff's aftershave through the closed door, could smell the whiskey on the man's breath, could smell the gunpowder residue on his hands from a recently fired weapon. Something was happening to him. Something profound and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. William staggered to his feet, the silver bullets clutched in one hand. He needed air, needed to think, needed to make sense of the impossible reality that seemed to be closing in around him. He crossed to the door and stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped steadily from the eaves. Sheriff Tanner stood at the edge of the clearing, his back to the cabin, speaking quietly into his radio. As William watched, the man stiffened, then turned slowly to face him. Even at this distance, William could see the change in Tanner's demeanor. The cautious friendliness was gone, replaced by something harder, warier. His hand rested casually on the butt of his service weapon. "Find what you were looking for, Mr. Blackwood?" Tanner called, his voice carrying easily across the muddy yard. William remained on the porch, suddenly acutely aware of his vulnerable position. The silver bullets were useless without a gun to fire them. His own weapon was back in the car. "Just some old keepsakes," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Things Jack would have wanted me to have." Tanner began walking toward the cabin, his movements deliberate, measured. "Interesting things, keepsakes. Memories, connections to the past." He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at William with eyes that now seemed darker, more calculating. "Sometimes the past is best left buried, don't you think?" William said nothing, every instinct now screaming danger. The unnatural smell he had detected inside the cabin was stronger now, emanating from the man before him. Not a human scent. Something else. Something wrong. "You should leave Shadowcrest, Mr. Blackwood," Tanner continued, his voice taking on a strange, almost hypnotic quality. "Go back to Arizona. Forget about Jack Holloway. Forget about silver bullets and old journals. Forget about everything you've learned today." William felt a pressure building in his mind, a compelling force urging him to agree, to obey. With a shock of horror, he realized that Tanner was somehow attempting to influence his thoughts, to bend his will. The rage came without warning, a volcanic eruption of fury that surged from some primal place deep within William's psyche. His vision washed red, his lips pulled back from his teeth in a snarl that was more animal than human. A growl, low and threatening, rumbled in his chest. "What are you?" William demanded, his voice rougher, deeper than normal. Tanner smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I think you know, Mr. Blackwood, just as I know what you are, what you're becoming." He took a step up, then another, closing the distance between them. "The question is, what are you going to do about it? An old man, alone, half awakened, against me." William stood his ground, though every human instinct urged him to flee. Something else, something deeper and more primal, kept him rooted in place. Territory, defense, the ancient imperative of the Alpha to protect what was his. "You killed Jack," William said, the certainty settling in his bones along with a cold rage. "You're the Strigoi." Tanner laughed, the sound sending ice down William's spine. "Strigoi, such an old-fashioned term. I prefer to think of myself as evolved." Another step closer. "Jack Holloway was poking his nose where it didn't belong, asking questions, researching old stories. He was getting too close to the truth." The smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "Just like you are now." William's hand closed around the silver bullets in his pocket. Useless without a gun. Unless... In one fluid motion, too fast for his conscious mind to track, William lunged forward, driving one of the silver bullets directly into Tanner's chest, like a makeshift knife. The reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. Tanner shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, and staggered backward. Where the silver touched him, smoke rose from his uniform, the fabric blackening and curling away from a wound that bubbled and hissed like acid on flesh. "You will die for that, old man," Tanner snarled, his face contorting, features shifting into something less than human. His eyes blazed with an unnatural amber light, his jaw elongating to accommodate teeth that now resembled fangs more than anything belonging in a human mouth. William stumbled back, his mind reeling with the confirmation of Elena's impossible claims. The Strigoi was real. It stood before him, transforming into something monstrous, something out of humanity's darkest nightmares. And he had nothing but 5 silver bullets and aging reflexes to defend himself. The creature that had been Sheriff Tanner gathered itself to spring, clawed hands flexing in anticipation. William braced himself for the attack, knowing he stood little chance against such supernatural speed and strength. It never came. A howl split the twilight air, primal and fierce, echoing from the surrounding forest like a war cry. Tanner froze, his inhuman face twisting in what could only be described as fear. His head snapped toward the tree line, nostrils flaring as he scented the wind. William followed his gaze, breath catching in his throat at what he saw emerging from the shadows between the ancient pines. Wolves. 6 of them, Massive creatures, larger than any natural wolf had a right to be, with thick silver-gray fur and intelligent eyes that fixed on Tanner with deadly purpose. They moved with eerie coordination, spreading out to surround the clearing, cutting off any avenue of escape. At their head walked Elena, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her simple dress replaced by what appeared to be leather armor of ancient design. She carried no weapon, yet radiated such palpable authority that William felt an inexplicable urge to bow his head in respect. "You dare hunt on Blackwood land, Strigoi?" she called, her voice ringing with power. "You dare violate the ancient covenant?" Tanner snarled, his body continuing its grotesque transformation. "The covenant is broken, witch. The bloodline is thin. The pack is scattered." He gestured contemptuously at William. "Look at your mighty alpha, an old man who does not even know what he is." "That will change," Elena replied calmly. "Tonight, under the full moon." She raised a hand, and the wolves around her tensed, ready to attack at her command. "Leave now, abomination, while I still permit it. Permit." The Strigoi glanced from Elena to the wolves to William, clearly calculating its chances. With a final hate-filled glare at William, it spoke. "This isn't over, Blackwood. Your grandfather couldn't kill me. Neither will you. I'll be back when the witch isn't around to protect you." Before William could respond, the creature blurred into motion, moving with supernatural speed toward the forest. Two of the wolves lunged to intercept it, but the Strigoi leapt, transforming midair into something bat-like and terrible that soared over their snapping jaws and disappeared into the gathering dusk. William stood rooted to the porch, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The Strigoi, the transformation, the wolves, Elena commanding them like an ancient warrior queen. It was madness. It was impossible. It was real. Elena approached the cabin, the wolves falling in behind her like an honor guard. She stopped at the foot of the steps, looking up at William with an expression that mingled triumph and concern. "Now, do you believe, William Blackwood?" she asked softly. William looked down at the silver bullets still clutched in his hand, at the journal in his pocket, at the impossible wolves watching him with unnervingly intelligent eyes. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elena gestured to the darkening sky visible through breaks in the clouds. "Now the moon rises. Your first full moon back on Blackwood land. Your awakening." Her amber eyes held his, solemn and ancient. "Now you become what you were always meant to be, the Alpha, the protector." William felt the silver ring in his pocket, suddenly heavy as a stone. Elena had said it would help him control the change, help him remember who he was. Who was he? A retired detective with bad knees and fading eyesight? A Vietnam veteran with PTSD? A man who had spent his entire life running from his past, from his heritage, from the truth? Or was he something more? Something ancient and powerful? Something that had been waiting in his blood for decades, patient as the moon cycles themselves, for him to finally come home. William Blackwood looked out at the forest where his ancestors had hunted for generations, at the land that sang to his awakening senses, at the wolves who watched him with expectation and hope. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the tarnished silver ring. The wolf head crest seemed to glow in the fading light, calling to him, claiming him. With a sense of inevitability, of destiny finally embraced, William slid the ring onto his finger. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Heat flooded through him, radiating from the ring up his arm and into his chest. His scar burned like a brand, the crescent moon pattern glowing with a blue-white light visible through the fabric of his sleeve. Every nerve ending came alive, every sense heightened beyond anything he had ever experienced. And the knowledge. Memories not his own cascaded through his consciousness, generations of Blackwoods running through these forests, fighting, protecting, leading the pack. The sacred duty passed down through blood and bone, from alpha to alpha, for centuries. His grandfather's voice, clear as though the old man stood beside him, whispered in his mind, "The moon calls, William. Answer it. Become what you are, what you have always been. Alpha, protector, Blackwood." William felt his body begin to change, bones shifting, muscles reconfiguring. It should have been agony, but the ring somehow channeled the pain, transforming it into a fierce, wild joy. As the full moon rose above the trees, bathing the clearing in silver light, William Blackwood threw back his head and howled, the sound echoing through the ancient forest like a proclamation, a return, a reclaiming. The Alpha had come home. The transformation seized William with a force beyond anything he had experienced in his 68 years. Bones cracked and realigned, muscles tore and reformed. His skin burned as coarse silver-gray fur erupted from pores that stretched and widened to accommodate the new growth. The pain should have been unbearable, yet something in the ancient silver ring channeled it, transformed it into a wild, fierce euphoria that rode the edge of agony without tipping over. William dropped to all fours on the cabin porch, his clothes splitting along seams, never designed to accommodate the massive frame now emerging. His consciousness expanded and contracted simultaneously, human thought processes giving way to something more primal, more instinctive, yet paradoxically more aware. Colors bled away, replaced by a world of silver and shadow, rendered in perfect detail despite the gathering dusk. Sense sharpened further, creating a three-dimensional map of his surroundings more precise than any visual rendering. Elena stood watching from the foot of the steps, her amber eyes reflecting the moonlight with the same animal luminescence now burning in William's transformed gaze. Behind her, the pack waited, their bodies taut with anticipation, soft whines of excitement rising from their throats as they witnessed the awakening of their alpha. William felt the final changes settle into place. His muzzle lengthened, filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. His ears grew pointed, swiveling independently to track the faintest sounds. His hands and feet transformed into massive paws, armed with claws that could disembowel with a single swipe. And then it was complete. Where William Blackwood the man had stood moments before, now crouched a wolf of impossible size, larger even than the impressive pack members surrounding the cabin. His fur was predominantly silver-gray, darkening to near black along his spine, with a distinctive white crescent marking on his chest that mirrored the scar on his human wrist. His eyes blazed with intelligence and power, the blue of his human irises transformed to a luminous gold that seemed to contain an inner fire. William took a tentative step, then another, his new body responding with a fluid grace that belied its size. There was no awkwardness, no adjustment period. The wolf knew how to move, how to balance, how to exist in this form as surely as his human self knew how to walk upright. It was instinct, blood memory, the accumulated knowledge of countless generations flowing through him. Elena approached slowly, showing neither fear nor submission. She stopped an arm's length away, meeting his golden gaze without flinching. "Welcome home, Alpha Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality it had in her human form. "The pack has waited a long time for your return." The words reached William through the wolf's consciousness, their meaning clear despite the transformation of his brain structure. He could understand human speech, could process complex thoughts, could remember who and what he had been just moments before. The silver ring, now merged with the fur and flesh of his front right paw, thrummed with ancient magic, anchoring his human identity within the beast. William turned his massive head toward the waiting wolves. They were enormous by natural standards, yet still smaller than he was, their silver-gray coats marking them as kindred. Pack. Family. He felt the connection between them, a bond of blood and magic that transcended ordinary understanding. They were his to protect, his to lead, his responsibility. As he watched, the wolves began to change. Fur receded, limbs straightened, muzzles shortened. Within moments, 6 naked humans stood where wolves had been moments before. 3 men and 3 women ranging in age from perhaps 20 to 60, all bearing the same distinctive silver hair, despite their varying ages. One of the men stepped forward, a tall, powerfully built individual of about 40, with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. He dropped to one knee before William, head bowed in a gesture of respect and submission. "Alpha," he said, his voice deep and rough. "I am Marcus, beta of what remains of the Blackwood Pack. We have kept the faith. We have guarded the territory. We have waited for your return." The others knelt as well, heads bowed, exposing vulnerable necks in the ultimate gesture of trust and submission. Their scents carried to William on the night air, each unique yet bound together by common threads of pack and belonging. William felt something stir within him, an emotion too complex for his wolf mind to fully process. These were his people. They had waited for him, maintained their vigil for decades while he ran from his heritage, denied his nature, abandoned his responsibilities. Yet here they were, offering allegiance without reservation or resentment. A low rumble rose in his chest, not a growl of aggression, but a sound of acknowledgement, of acceptance. He moved forward, his massive form dwarfing even Marcus as he stopped before the kneeling Beta. William lowered his head, touching his muzzle briefly to the top of the man's head in a gesture as old as the pack itself. An acceptance of loyalty, a promise of protection. Elena watched the ritual with approval in her ancient eyes. "The bond is reestablished," she said. "The Alpha has claimed his pack. Now we hunt." The word triggered something primal and joyous in William's transformed consciousness. Hunt, run, chase, kill. The basic imperatives of the wolf, uncomplicated by human moral frameworks or societal constraints. The forest beckoned, vast and wild beneath the silver moon, filled with prey and challenges and the sheer exhilaration of speed and strength. The pack rose, shifting back to wolf form with the practiced ease of those born to the change. Within moments, they stood ready, tails raised, eyes bright with anticipation. Elena alone remained human, watching William with an expression that mingled pride and caution. "Remember who you are, William Blackwood," she said softly. "The ring will help you maintain control, but the first hunt is always the most dangerous, the most seductive. Some lose themselves in the joy of it, forget their human side entirely." Her amber eyes held his. "You must return with the dawn. There is much still to discuss, much you need to know." William understood, the human part of his consciousness acknowledging her warning, even as the wolf strained for release, eager to run, to hunt, to assert his dominance over the wilderness that was his birthright. He dipped his massive head once in affirmation, then turned toward the forest. With a bound that carried him clear off the porch and halfway across the clearing, William launched himself into the night, the pack falling in behind him in a formation as ancient as the moon that called them. They ran as one entity, 6 silver shadows following a darker leader, their passage through the underbrush nearly silent despite their size. William felt his powerful muscles working, felt the cool night air rushing through his fur, felt the springy earth beneath his paws. Every sense was alive, processing information with supernatural acuity. The scent trails of deer crossed their path, recent enough to follow. The distant sound of running water promised relief for thirsts that would build with exertion. The very texture of the night air against his sensitive nose told him a storm was building miles away, beyond the mountains, moving their direction. They ran for what seemed like hours, but might have been minutes, time losing meaning in the pure joy of movement. William set a pace that would have exhausted any natural wolf, yet his supernatural pack kept up easily, their endurance as enhanced as their size. Eventually they reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. William slowed, instinct rather than conscious thought guiding him to a vantage point atop a granite outcropping. He stood motionless, massive head raised, scenting the wind as the pack gathered around him in a protective semicircle. Below, in a moonlit meadow, a small herd of deer grazed, unaware of the predators watching from above. William counted 8 mature animals and 3 fawns, their white tails occasionally flicking in the silver light. Prey, food. The wolf part of his brain assessed them with the detached calculation of a natural hunter, identifying the weakest, planning the approach, the takedown. The human part of his mind recoiled slightly. William Blackwood, the man, had never killed for pleasure, only for duty during wartime or in the line of police work when absolutely necessary. The thought of bringing down one of those peaceful creatures with fang and claw seemed unnecessarily brutal, primally violent. The internal conflict must have shown in his body language. Marcus, still in wolf form, moved closer, pressing his flank briefly against William's in a gesture of support and understanding. His scent carried a message as clear as spoken words. This is natural. This is necessary. This is who we are. William hesitated a moment longer, then made his decision. He would hunt. Yes, the wolf needed this, needed to fulfill its nature, establish its dominance. But he would hunt as wolves were meant to hunt, taking only what was needed, killing cleanly, wasting nothing. He leaned forward, muscles tensing in preparation for the charge down the slope. The pack sensed his decision, their own bodies coiling like springs, ready to follow their alpha into the hunt. William gathered himself, calculating the perfect moment to break from cover, when a scent reached his nostrils that froze him in place. Blood. Human blood. The metallic tang was unmistakable, carried on the night breeze from somewhere to the east. Not old blood, not a scent trail from days past. Fresh, recent. Along with it came other smells, fear sweat, gunpowder, and something else, something fetid and wrong that he now recognized as the stench of the strigoi. The deer forgotten, William swung his massive head toward the source of the scent, a growl building in his chest. The hunt would have to wait. Something was very wrong in his territory, something that demanded the immediate attention of the alpha. Without hesitation, William leaped from the outcropping and charged into the forest, following the blood scent with single-minded determination. The pack fell in behind him, sensing the change in purpose, their playful anticipation replaced by grim focus. This was no longer a training exercise or a food hunt. This was protection of territory, the core purpose of the pack. They ran for perhaps 2 miles, the scent growing stronger with each passing minute. William slowed as they approached a small clearing, caution overtaking his urgency. He signaled the pack with a subtle change in posture, and they immediately spread out, creating a perimeter as they advanced. The scene that greeted them as they entered the clearing sent a shock of horror through the human part of William's consciousness. A small campsite had been established beside a stream. A single tent pitched near a now smoldering campfire. The tent had been shredded, its contents scattered across the ground as though a tornado had passed through. The campfire had been kicked apart, embers still glowing among the ruins. And the blood. So much blood. It saturated the ground around the tent, splashed across nearby trees in arterial spray patterns William recognized all too well from his years in law enforcement. The attack had been recent, violent, and thorough. William approached cautiously, his enhanced senses cataloging the evidence with professional detachment despite the wolf's instinctive recoil from the overwhelming scent of death. 2 victims, he determined, both male, both likely in their 30s, judging by the few personal effects not drenched in blood. Hikers, probably, or weekend campers up from Portland or Seattle. The killing bore all the hallmarks of the strigoi. The same fetid smell that had emanated from the false sheriff Tanner permeated the scene. The same pattern of wounds he had glimpsed on Jack's body was evident in the few remaining scraps of the victims not already consumed. The strigoi had fed here, recently, messily, as though in a rage. One of the female wolves whined softly, drawing William's attention. She stood by the stream, her sensitive nose indicating something in the water. William joined her, following her gaze to a dark shape caught among the rocks about 20 yards downstream. A body, or what remained of one. The flowing water had washed away much of the blood, but even in the moonlight, William could see the hideous wounds that had ended the man's life. His throat had been torn out, his chest cavity opened, his limbs bearing defensive wounds that spoke of a desperate but futile struggle. Yet something was wrong. The scent was off. This victim smelled of the strigoi itself, not just its attack. William waded into the cold stream, ignoring the shock of it against his warm fur, and approached the body carefully. As he drew closer, understanding dawned. This was not a third victim. This was one of the attackers. A lesser strigoi, not as powerful as the one masquerading as Sheriff Tanner, but of the same species. It had been killed during the attack, perhaps by one of the campers fighting back with a silver object, or perhaps by Tanner himself in a fit of rage or dominance. William examined the corpse more closely. The fatal wound was a jagged tear across the throat, made by fangs larger than his own. The edges of the wound were blackened, necrotic, as though the flesh had been poisoned. This creature had died by the fangs of its own kind. Tanner had killed it, then taken his rage out on the human campers. A memory surfaced from William's childhood, one of his grandfather's many lessons delivered during those long evenings by the fire. Strigoi were solitary by nature, coming together only to mate or to feed on particularly large prey. They were fiercely territorial, killing their own kind who encroached on their hunting grounds without permission. Yet they could also create lesser servants, thralls who served the master Strigoi until they outlived their usefulness or made some fatal mistake. This dead creature had been such a thrall, and it had displeased its master somehow. William backed away from the corpse, a cold dread settling in his chest despite the warmth of his fur. If Tanner was creating thralls, building a small army of lesser Strigoi, the situation was far more dangerous than even Elena had implied. A single Strigoi was a formidable opponent. Multiple Strigoi, coordinated by a master, could threaten the entire territory, could threaten Shadowcrest itself. A sound from the forest edge snapped William's attention away from the dead thrall. Something was approaching the clearing, something large, moving with the confidence of an apex predator. William signaled the pack to defensive positions with a subtle movement of his ears. They responded instantly, melting into the shadows at the perimeter, their silver fur blending with the moonlight dappling the forest floor. William himself remained in the open, standing tall beside the ruined campsite, a deliberate challenge to whatever approached. If it was Tanner returning to his kill site, William wanted the Strigoi to know that the territory now had a defender, that the Blackwood Alpha had returned. The underbrush parted, and a figure stepped into the clearing. Not Tanner, not a Strigoi at all. A human. A young man of perhaps 25 stood at the edge of the trees, a high-powered rifle cradled in his arms. He wore camouflage hunting gear and a shocked expression as he took in both the carnage of the campsite and the enormous wolf standing amid the destruction. The wind shifted, bringing his scent to William's sensitive nose. Gunpowder, sweat, fear, spiking sharply as their eyes met across the clearing, and something else, something familiar that stirred recognition deep in William's transformed brain. This young man smelled of Blackwood blood. William remained perfectly still, fighting the wolf's instinct to challenge this armed intruder. The human part of his mind recognized the danger of the situation. To this hunter, William appeared to be a monstrous wolf standing among the remains of what looked like a wolf attack on human campers. The rifle in the young man's hands could easily contain silver ammunition, especially this close to Shadowcrest, where old knowledge sometimes persisted despite modern skepticism. The young man raised his rifle slowly, hands steady despite the fear evident in his wide eyes. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, the sound carrying clearly to William's enhanced hearing. "What the hell are you?" William had no way to respond, no way to communicate in this form that he was not the threat, that the real monster had already fled the scene. All he could do was stand his ground and hope the young man would not fire before the pack could safely withdraw. A low growl emanated from the shadows behind the hunter, one of the pack, moving to flank the potential threat. The young man spun, rifle swinging toward the new sound, and in that moment of distraction, William made his decision. He charged, covering the distance between them in 3 enormous bounds, faster than human reflexes could track. Before the hunter could bring his weapon to bear, William was upon him, massive paws connecting with his chest, sending him sprawling backward onto the forest floor. The rifle went flying, landing with a splash in the nearby stream. William pinned the young man with one huge paw on his chest, careful to apply just enough pressure to immobilize without injuring. He lowered his muzzle until they were face to face, his hot breath washing over the terrified hunter, golden eyes locked with wide brown ones. Recognition flickered in those human eyes. Not of William specifically, but of something in his lupine features. Some echo of shared blood, shared heritage. "Blackwood," the young man gasped, his voice choked with fear and awe. You're a Blackwood wolf." William froze, shocked that this stranger would recognize what he was. The young man remained still beneath his restraining paw, no longer struggling, his expression transforming from terror to wonder. "My grandmother told me stories," he continued, words tumbling out in a rush, "about the guardian wolves of Shadowcrest, the Blackwood pack. I never believed her, thought they were just fairy tales." A shaky laugh escaped him. "Guess I was wrong." William eased the pressure slightly, allowing the young man to breathe more freely. He scented no deception, only genuine shock and the lingering trace of familiar blood. This human was connected to him somehow, connected to the pack, though clearly not a werewolf himself. "My name is Daniel," the young man said, seeming to gather courage from William's lessened aggression. "Daniel Blackwood. My father was Thomas Blackwood. I think we might be related." The name struck William like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwood, his younger brother. The baby of the family, only 10 years old when William had left for Vietnam, never to return. Thomas, who would now be in his 60s if he still lived, and this young man claimed to be his son, William's nephew. William backed away slowly, releasing Daniel from his pin. The young man sat up cautiously, making no move toward where his rifle lay half submerged in the stream. Instead, he remained seated on the forest floor, watching William with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You're not going to kill me," he said, a statement rather than a question. "You know who I am, don't you? You understand what I'm saying." William had no way to communicate in this form, no way to confirm or deny. He could only watch and listen as this unexpected blood relative continued. "My father told me there was another Blackwood out there somewhere. His older brother, William, left before I was born, never came back." Daniel studied William's lupine features intently. "Grandmother said he rejected the old ways, rejected the pack, but she always believed he would return someday when the blood called strongly enough." A pause, then. "Is that you? Are you William Blackwood?" The question hung in the night air, impossible to answer in his current form. Yet William felt the truth of it resonating in his transformed body. This was indeed his brother's son, his nephew, blood of his blood, family he had never known existed. Before William could decide how to proceed, a howl split the night, coming from the direction of the Holloway cabin, not one of his pack, who all stood watching silently from the shadows surrounding the clearing. This was Elena's voice, the tone urgent, summoning. Marcus emerged from the darkness, moving to William's side. In the limited speech available to them in wolf form, communicated more through scent and body language than actual words, he conveyed a simple message. "Dawn approaches. We must return." William glanced at the eastern horizon, noting with surprise the faint lightening of the sky. The night had passed more swiftly than he had realized, the hunt and the discovery of the Strigoi victims consuming hours he had not tracked in his transformed state. He looked back at Daniel, who had risen to his feet but made no move either to flee or to retrieve his weapon. The young man stood watching the interaction between the wolves with open fascination, fear giving way to curiosity. "You have to go," Daniel said, demonstrating an uncanny perception. "But we're not done here. I've been looking for answers my whole life, about my family, about the legends, about why my father drank himself to death afraid of the full moon." His voice hardened with determination. "I'll be at the White Pine Tavern in town tonight. If you're who I think you are, if you can understand me at all, meet me there, 8 o'clock. William held the young man's gaze for a long moment, then dipped his massive head in what could only be interpreted as acknowledgement. With one fluid motion, he turned and bounded into the forest, the pack flowing around him like quicksilver, leaving Daniel Blackwood standing alone amid the carnage of the Strigoi's feast. They ran swiftly through the pre-dawn forest, returning toward the Holloway cabin where Elena waited. William's mind raced faster than his paws, human thoughts reasserting themselves as the night's hunt came to an end. His brother had lived in Shadowcrest all these years, had married, had a son, had eventually succumbed to alcoholism, according to Daniel. And through it all, William had known nothing, safe in his self-imposed exile, hiding from his heritage while his brother apparently suffered under the weight of it. The guilt was a physical pain, sharper than the transformation that had reshaped his bones hours earlier. He had abandoned his family, abandoned his responsibilities, and others had paid the price for his cowardice. As they approached the cabin clearing, William felt the first warning signs of the change reversing itself. The silver ring on his paw pulsed with heat, the magic that had facilitated his transformation now preparing to return him to human form. His muscles began to tremble, not with fatigue, but with the impending metamorphosis. Elena stood on the porch of the cabin, waiting. As the pack slowed to a walk at the edge of the clearing, she raised a hand in greeting, her ancient eyes taking in their condition, noting the absence of blood that would have indicated a successful hunt. "You found something more important than prey," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. William managed a jerky nod as the change overtook him. It was faster than the transformation to wolf form, but no less intense. Bones snapped and realigned. Fur receded into skin that stretched and shifted to accommodate his human dimensions. The silver ring, which had seemed to merge with his paw during the transformation, now reappeared on his finger, gleaming in the faint pre-dawn light. Within moments, William Blackwood the man knelt naked on the dewy grass of the clearing, gasping as the last tremors of the change subsided. Around him, the pack underwent similar transformations, returning to their human forms with practiced ease that spoke of lifetimes of experience. Marcus, now a powerfully built man with the same silver hair that marked all the pack members, helped William to his feet with a strong hand beneath his elbow. "First change back is always the hardest, Alpha," he said, his voice gruff but sympathetic. "It gets easier." William nodded his thanks, still unable to speak as his vocal cords readjusted to human configuration. Elena approached, carrying a bundle of clothing which she handed to William with a small smile. "Your own clothes did not survive the initial transformation," she said. "These belong to your grandfather. They should fit well enough until we can find more suitable attire." William accepted the bundle gratefully, finding a simple flannel shirt, jeans, and boots that looked as though they had been preserved for decades. They smelled of cedar and age, and faintly of his grandfather's pipe tobacco, a scent that triggered a cascade of memories from his childhood. As he dressed, the rest of the pack donned clothing they had apparently stashed nearby in preparation for their return to human form. They moved with the easy confidence of those completely comfortable in their dual nature, shifting from wolf to human and back with no apparent identity crisis or moral quandary. William envied them that certainty, that acceptance of what they were. His own mind was a battlefield of conflicting impulses, the exhilaration of the hunt warring with human ethical frameworks, the freedom of the wolf chafing against the responsibilities of the man. Once dressed, William followed Elena into the cabin, the pack trailing behind in a loose formation that nonetheless maintained clear hierarchical positions. Marcus, as Beta, stayed closest to William, with the others arranged according to some internal ranking system William had yet to fully understand. Inside, the cabin had been transformed in their absence. The bloodstains remained, grim reminders of Jack's violent death, but the space had been organized, cleaned where possible. A fire burned in the hearth, providing both warmth and light in the pre-dawn gloom. The wooden table was laden with food, bread, cheese, fruit, and a large platter of rare meat that sent William's newly sensitive nose twitching with interest. "You must eat," Elena said, gesturing to the feast. "The change burns energy like nothing else. You need to replenish your strength." William found he was ravenous, his stomach growling audibly at the sight and smell of food. He approached the table, the pack hanging back respectfully, until he had taken the first portion, a behavior so instinctive he didn't question it until he was already filling a plate. "The Alpha eats first," Marcus explained, noting William's momentary hesitation. "It is our way." William nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table in what had clearly once been Jack's chair. Another pang of grief and guilt struck him at the thought of his friend, murdered in this very room while William had been safely tucked away in Arizona, ignorant of the dangers resurfacing in Shadowcrest. As he ate, Tearing into the rare meat with a hunger that would have disturbed his former self, Elena and Marcus took seats on either side of him. The rest of the pack arranged themselves around the table, maintaining the same hierarchical positioning that seemed as natural to them as breathing. "You found the Strigoi's hunting ground," Elena said, when William's initial hunger had been somewhat sated. Again, not a question, a statement of fact. William nodded, swallowing a mouthful of meat. "A campsite, 2 dead hikers, and something else. A dead thrall. One of Tanner's lesser servants, I think." He looked up, meeting Elena's amber gaze. "Tanner killed it, tore its throat out. Why would he kill his own kind?" Elena's expression darkened. "The Strigoi is not known for loyalty to its creations. They are tools, nothing more. When they fail or displease the master, they are discarded." She leaned forward, her ancient eyes intent. "But this confirms my fears. The Strigoi is building a nest, creating lesser servants to extend its reach, its power. This is not the behavior of a creature simply passing through territory. This is the behavior of one intending to stay, to rule." "It seemed enraged," William said, remembering the excessive violence of the campsite attack. "The killing was messier than it needed to be, more destructive." Marcus nodded grimly. "Your return has challenged it. For decades it has hunted these woods unopposed. The pack was too few, too weak without an alpha to effectively resist. Now you have come home, claimed your birthright. It knows the balance of power has shifted. And it will escalate its attacks in response," Elena added. "It will kill more frequently, more visibly, create more thralls, attempt to establish dominance through terror." Her voice hardened. "This is how the last great war between our kinds began 300 years ago, with a Strigoi seeking to claim territory through blood and fear." William set down his fork, the implications of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. "You're saying we're on the brink of a supernatural war, in the 21st century, in rural Oregon." "The century matters little to creatures like us," Elena replied. "The Strigoi has existed for 1,000 years or more. The Blackwood Pack has guarded this territory for 3 centuries. Modern human civilization is but a thin veneer over ancient conflicts that have never truly ended." William ran a hand through his silver hair, still damp from the exertions of the night. "I met someone in the forest, a young man. He said his name was Daniel Blackwood, claimed to be my brother's son." He looked up, seeking confirmation. "Did my brother Thomas stay in Shadowcrest after I left?" Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. It was Marcus who answered, his deep voice solemn. "Thomas Blackwood remained. Without you, the alpha power should have passed to him, but he was too young, too unprepared. The change never fully manifested in him. He lived his life caught between worlds, neither fully human nor fully wolf. It damaged him." The guilt that had been building in William's chest sharpened to an almost physical pain. "Daniel said he drank himself to death." Elena nodded sadly. "Thomas carried the burden of knowing what he should have been, yet could never become. He married a human woman, had a son, but the marriage could not survive his demons. His wife left, taking young Daniel with her. They returned to Shadowcrest only after Thomas died 5 years ago. And Daniel? Is he like his father, caught between worlds?" "No," Elena said. "The bloodline runs too thin now. Daniel is fully human, though he carries enough of the heritage to sense our kind, to be drawn to the old stories. He has been searching for answers since his return, asking questions about the Blackwood family, about the legends of guardian wolves." Her amber eyes held William's. "About you." William pushed his plate away, appetite gone despite the lingering hunger from the transformation. "I should have been here," he said quietly, the words inadequate to express the magnitude of his failure. "I abandoned my brother, abandoned the pack, ran away from everything my grandfather tried to teach me." "Yes," Elena agreed, her tone neither accusing nor forgiving, simply acknowledging the truth. "You did, but you have returned now when the need is greatest. The question is not what you failed to do 50 years ago, William Blackwood. The question is what you will do now." Before William could respond, Marcus spoke up, his voice respectful but insistent. "Alpha, there is something else you should know. About the Strigoi. About why it hunts your bloodline specifically." William turned to his beta, noting the tension in the man's powerful frame. "Go on." "It is not just any Strigoi," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "It is the one your grandfather wounded 50 years ago, the one he drove from the territory at great cost." He hesitated, then continued, "The one that killed your parents." The words hit William like a physical blow. "My parents died in a car accident," he said automatically, the story he had been told as a child surfacing from memory. "Their brakes failed on the mountain road during a storm." Elena shook her head slowly. That was the official explanation, the human explanation. The truth is, they were returning from a meeting with other pack leaders when their car was attacked. The Strigoi ran them off the road, then finished what the crash did not. Her eyes held infinite sadness. "Your grandfather found them. He tracked the Strigoi to its lair, wounded it so severely it fled the territory. But the victory came too late for your parents." William sat in stunned silence, the foundations of his understanding crumbling beneath this new information. He had been 15 when his parents died, old enough to question, to doubt the official story, yet he had accepted it without reservation, had buried himself in books and studies, turning away from the wilderness skills and pack lore his grandfather had tried to teach him in the aftermath. Had his subconscious known the truth all along? Had some part of him sensed the real nature of his parents' deaths and rejected it as too painful, too terrifying to acknowledge? "So this is personal," William said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "The Strigoi killed my parents, and now it's back to finish the job, to eliminate the last of the Blackwood Alpha line." "Yes," Elena confirmed, "but it is more than personal vendetta. The Strigoi covets this territory because it is special, powerful, a nexus of natural energies that can strengthen creatures like us. Your ancestors chose this land 3 centuries ago for exactly that reason. The Strigoi wants that power for itself, to feed on it, to corrupt it." William looked around the table at the pack members who watched him with expressions ranging from sympathy to carefully veiled assessment. They were waiting, he realized, waiting to see how their newly returned alpha would respond to these revelations, waiting to see if he was truly worthy of the role fate and blood had assigned him. "Tell me about the pack," he said, deliberately shifting the focus from his personal history to his responsibilities. "How many of you are there? I count 6 here." 8 in total, Marcus replied, seeming relieved by the change in subject. "Myself, these 5 you see before you, and 2 cubs currently being guarded at the den site by Celine, our Omega." At William's questioning look, he clarified, "The youngest of the adults, the most nurturing, the one best suited to protect the young while the hunting pack is away." William nodded, absorbing this information. "And you've survived all these years without an alpha. How exactly?" "With difficulty," Marcus admitted. "The pack bond is weakened without the alpha presence. The change becomes harder to control, especially for the younger ones. Hunting is less efficient, territory harder to defend." His expression grew troubled. "We have lost members over the decades, some to the Strigoi, some to hunters with silver bullets, some simply left, unable to endure the broken pack bond." "There were 23 when your grandfather was alpha," Elena added quietly. "A strong, healthy pack, one of the most respected among our kind." The weight of responsibility pressed down on William's shoulders with crushing force. 23 reduced to 8. A legacy nearly destroyed because of his absence, his rejection of his heritage, lives lost, territory compromised. And now a deadly enemy resurging, determined to eliminate what remained of the Blackwood pack. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for this," William said honestly, looking from Elena to Marcus. "I spent one night as a wolf. I know nothing about pack dynamics, territory defense, or fighting Strigoi. I was a cop, for God's sake. I spent my life enforcing human laws, living by human rules." "You are Blackwood," Elena replied simply. The blood knows what to do, even if your mind does not yet understand. The ring helps channel that knowledge, access the memories of your ancestors. She gestured to the silver band still on his finger. Did you not feel it last night? The certainty? The rightness of your actions? William couldn't deny it. Despite the strangeness of his transformed state, there had been an underlying confidence, an instinctive understanding of his role and powers that had nothing to do with his conscious knowledge. The blood remembers what the mind forgets, Marcus added. You are alpha not just because of your lineage, but because of something in your essential nature. Something that cannot be learned or earned. It simply is. William looked down at his hands, human now but capable of becoming lethal weapons with the next full moon. Or sooner, if Elena was to be believed. The silver ring gleamed on his finger, the wolf head crest catching the firelight just as his grandfather's ring had done decades ago during those long nights of storytelling. Stories he now knew were not fiction, but history, family history, his history. All right, he said finally, looking up to meet the expectant gazes of his pack. I need to know everything. About the Strigoi, about our kind, about what happened while I was gone. He turned to Elena. And about you. Who you are. What you are. Why you've stayed to protect a broken pack when you clearly aren't one of us. Elena smiled, a slow, ancient expression that transformed her face into something timeless and faintly inhuman despite her apparent age. A fair request, Alpha Blackwood. The answers are intertwined, a single tapestry of history and fate that began long before your birth. She settled back in her chair, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight in a way that was not entirely natural. I am Elena Vasile. I was born in the Carpathian Mountains of what is now Romania, in the year 1642. I am what my people called vrăjitoare, witch in your language, though that word has lost much of its meaning through superstition and fear. William stared at her, mentally calculating. You're claiming to be nearly 400 years old. 383, to be precise, she replied with the faintest hint of amusement. Young, by some standards, ancient by others. And you expect me to believe this because you have just spent the night running on 4 legs instead of 2, Alpha Blackwood, she countered smoothly, because you have seen a man transform into a monster before your eyes, because the world is far older and stranger than your human life has led you to believe. William couldn't argue with that logic. After what he had experienced in the past 24 hours, a witch claiming to be centuries old seemed almost mundane by comparison. Fair point, he conceded. So how does a Romanian witch end up in Oregon protecting a pack of werewolves? I came to the New World in 1712, fleeing persecution in my homeland. The Church's witch hunters had grown too skilled, too numerous. Many of my kind perished in fire and agony. A shadow passed over her face, old grief momentarily visible before being tucked away again. I wandered for a century, moving whenever human suspicion grew too great. In 1842, I came to this territory, drawn by the same energies that would later attract the Blackwood pack. She paused, taking a sip from a cup of herbal tea that steamed gently in the cool morning air. 20 years later, the first Blackwoods arrived. Ethan Blackwood, your great-great-grandfather, leading a pack of 12. They had traveled from Massachusetts, where human expansion had made their existence increasingly precarious. They sought wilderness, freedom, a place where the pack could thrive without constant fear of discovery. William listened, fascinated despite himself. This was his family history, the story his grandfather had tried to tell him when he was too young, too impatient to truly listen. Ethan sensed the power in the land immediately, Elena continued. As did I. We might have been enemies, competing for the same resources, but fate intervened. A Strigoi had preceded us both to the territory. It had been feeding on isolated settlers, indigenous peoples, anyone vulnerable and alone, creating thralls, building power. The same one that's here now? That killed my parents? William asked. Elena nodded solemnly. "The same. It is very old, even by my standards. It came to the Americas with the earliest European explorers, feeding on sailors and colonists, moving always westward ahead of civilization. By the time it reached this territory, it had grown powerful indeed, gorged on centuries of bloodshed and conquest. Ethan Blackwood and I formed an alliance out of necessity," she went on. "My magic, his pack's strength. Together we drove the Strigoi into the deep wilderness, wounded it severely enough that it took decades to recover. In gratitude, Ethan offered me a place within the pack's protection, not as a member, for I could never be Wolf, but as an advisor, a guardian of knowledge." A small smile touched her lips. "The position has passed down through the generations of Blackwood Alphas. Your grandfather called me friend, as did his father before him." William absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the fragmented stories he remembered from childhood. "And the covenant you mentioned when we first met? What is that exactly?" "A magical binding," Elena explained. "A pact between the pack, myself, and the land itself. So long as the Blackwoods protect the territory from creatures like the Strigoi, the land empowers the pack, makes them stronger, their transformations more complete. In return, I maintain the boundary spells that hide our activities from human awareness, that blur memories, that keep our existence in the realm of legend rather than fact." "A supernatural ecosystem," William murmured, the scientist in him finding framework for the fantastical. "Each party benefiting from the others, maintaining balance." "Precisely," Elena agreed, looking pleased at his understanding. "A balance that has held for generations, until now." "Until I abandoned my responsibilities," William said, the guilt resurging, "and the Strigoi returned to a territory without its primary defender." "It was not that simple," Marcus interjected. "Your grandfather continued as Alpha for many years after you left. He trained Thomas as best he could, though the boy never fully manifested the change. The pack remained strong until Caleb's death." "How did he die?" William asked, realizing he had never been notified, had never attended any funeral. Another failure to add to his growing list. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances again, some silent communication passing between them. It was Elena who answered, her voice gentle but unflinching. "He died hunting the Strigoi after it killed your parents. The wounds he inflicted drove it from the territory, but the battle cost him his life. He was found at the boundary of the packlands, silver knife still clutched in his hand, throat torn out, but face peaceful. He died protecting what he loved, as a Blackwood Alpha should." William closed his eyes briefly, grief for the grandfather he had abandoned washing over him in a fresh wave. Caleb Blackwood had been a difficult man, stern and demanding, but he had loved his grandsons fiercely, had tried to prepare them for the legacy that was both gift and burden. And William had rejected it all, run away to find a normal life, leaving his family vulnerable to an ancient enemy. "I need to see my brother's grave," he said abruptly, opening his eyes, "and my grandfather's. Pay my respects. I owe them that much at least." "Of course," Elena agreed. "They lie in the Blackwood family plot, beyond the old cabin, but that should wait for nightfall. There are more pressing matters to address now." "Such as?" "Such as your nephew waiting for answers at the White Pine Tavern tonight," she reminded him. "Such as Sheriff Tanner, who must surely be planning his next move now that his true nature has been revealed to you." William nodded, conceding the point. "And the Strigoi's hunting grounds. We need to secure the area, make sure there are no survivors we missed, no evidence that might draw human attention." "Marcus and the others can handle that," Elena said. "You need rest. The first transformation takes a tremendous toll on the body, even with the ring's assistance." She studied his face with those ancient amber eyes. "And you need time to process all that has happened, all that you have learned." William couldn't deny his exhaustion. Despite the food he had consumed, a bone-deep weariness pulled at him, his muscles aching from exertions they had never experienced before. His mind felt similarly overtaxed, struggling to integrate the flood of new information, new sensations, new responsibilities. "Rest," Marcus agreed, rising from the table. "We will secure the hunting grounds, check the boundary markers, make certain the territory is safe for now." He gestured to the back of the cabin. "Jack's bedroom is through there. It is the safest place for you until nightfall." William wanted to protest that he didn't need protection, that he had spent decades looking after himself, but the events of the past 24 hours had thoroughly demolished such pretensions. He was in a world of supernatural predators now, a world where his human skills and experience counted for little. "Thank you," he said instead, accepting the necessity with as much grace as he could muster. "Wake me if anything changes, if there's any sign of Tanner or his thralls." Marcus nodded, already organizing the pack with subtle gestures and meaningful glances. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of a military unit long accustomed to working together, gathering weapons William hadn't noticed before. Silver knives, crossbows with peculiar metal-tipped bolts, vials of what might have been holy water or something more arcane. Within minutes, they had departed, leaving William alone with Elena in the suddenly quiet cabin. She remained seated at the table, watching him with those unnerving amber eyes that seemed to see far more than his physical presence. "You have questions still," she stated, "things you did not wish to ask before the pack." William nodded, grateful for her perception. "The ring," he said, holding up his hand where the silver band gleamed. "You said it helps control the change. Does that mean I can transform at will, not just during the full moon?" "With practice, yes," she confirmed. "The moon's pull is strongest during its fullness, making the change both easier and more difficult to resist. But a Blackwood Alpha, with the ring's assistance, can shift forms whenever necessary. It is one of your greatest advantages over the Strigoi, who is bound by stricter limitations." "And the pack? Can they do the same?" "To a lesser degree. Their transformations are tied more closely to the lunar cycle, though with the Alpha presence strengthening the pack bond, they will gain greater control over time." She smiled slightly. "You noticed they changed back to wolf form easily last night after first meeting you in human form. That was your influence already at work, your power flowing through the pack bonds, strengthening them." William considered this, trying to wrap his mind around the metaphysics of it all. "You keep mentioning these pack bonds. What exactly are they? Some kind of telepathic connection?" "Not telepathy as humans understand it," Elena replied thoughtfully. "More a sharing of emotional states, instinctive knowledge of each other's locations, physical well-being. The Alpha connection is strongest. You will always know if a pack member is in danger, in pain. They will always be able to sense your call, no matter the distance." She tilted her head, studying him. "You felt it last night, did you not? The awareness of them around you, the certainty of their positions even when they were out of sight?" William nodded slowly. He had indeed been aware of the pack's movements with a clarity that went beyond normal sensory input, had known instinctively where each member was during the hunt, during the investigation of the campsite, during the encounter with Daniel. "There is one more thing you should know," Elena said, her tone growing more serious. "Something the pack would not speak of directly, out of respect for your position." "What's that?" "An alpha without a mate is vulnerable," she stated bluntly. "The power is unbalanced, the connection to the territory incomplete. Your grandfather had your grandmother as his mate. Their bond strengthened his authority, his control, his connection to the pack lands." She held his gaze steadily. "The Strigoi will know this, will seek to exploit this weakness." William stared at her, momentarily at a loss for words. "I'm 68 years old," he said finally. "A widower for over a decade. I'm not exactly in the market for a mate." Something flickered in Elena's amber eyes, a emotion too quickly hidden for William to identify. "Age means little to our kind. You noticed your physical ailments diminishing already, did you not? The knee pain fading, the eyesight improving. This is the territory's energy healing you, restoring you to what a Blackwood Alpha should be. In time, you will regain much of your physical prime." William had indeed noticed these changes, had attributed them to the transformation, the adrenaline, the extraordinary circumstances. But permanent healing? Rejuvenation? It seemed too much to believe, even after all he had already accepted. "And I'm supposed to just find a werewolf woman willing to be my mate? To complete some magical bond?" He shook his head, the absurdity of it striking him despite everything else he had embraced in the past day. "That's asking a bit much, don't you think?" Elena rose from her chair, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. "What I think, William Blackwood, is that you have spent 50 years running from your destiny, from your true nature, from connections that might bind you to responsibilities you feared." Her voice was not unkind, but it held an edge of challenge. "Perhaps it is time to consider that the path forward may require more change than simply accepting your wolf form." With that cryptic statement, she moved toward the door. "Rest now. Regain your strength. Tonight you will meet your nephew, and the next phase of this long game will begin." She paused, hand on the latch, looking back over her shoulder. "I will be at the apothecary when you wake. There are preparations to make if we are to face the Strigoi and survive." Before William could respond, she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving him alone with his turbulent thoughts and the fading sense of pack and prey and ancient magic. He moved wearily toward the bedroom Marcus had indicated, his body demanding rest despite the chaotic state of his mind. Jack's room was sparse, functional, the space of a man who had lived alone for many years. A sturdy bed with plain linens, a dresser topped with a few personal items, a small bookshelf filled with volumes on local history, wildlife guides, and what appeared to be journals similar to the one William had found hidden in the fireplace. William sank onto the edge of the bed, the exhaustion of the night's transformation and revelations finally catching up to him. As he lay back on the pillow, still fully clothed in his grandfather's garments, his hand came to rest on the silver ring. The wolf head crest seemed to pulse gently against his skin, a reminder of who and what he now was. Not just William Blackwood, retired detective, not just a Vietnam veteran with bad knees and fading eyesight, but Alpha, protector, guardian of territory and pack against an ancient evil that had already claimed too many lives. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of his nephew, waiting for answers at the White Pine Tavern. Answers William himself was only beginning to understand. Answers that might put Daniel Blackwood in terrible danger simply by knowing them. The Strigoi had already taken William's parents, his grandfather, perhaps contributed to his brother's decline and death. The thought of it claiming his newly discovered nephew as well sent a growl rumbling through his human chest, the wolf within responding to the threat even as consciousness faded. Sleep took him then, deep and dreamless, the exhaustion of transformation claiming its due. And as he slept, the silver ring glowed softly in the dim light of the bedroom, its ancient magic working to heal and strengthen the last Blackwood Alpha for the battles that lay ahead. William awoke to the sound of rain tapping against the window panes, a gentle percussion that momentarily disoriented him. The familiar scent of Jack's cabin filled his nostrils with painful clarity, each component distinct and identifiable in a way that still unsettled him. Wood smoke from the banked fire in the main room, the lingering traces of his pack's presence from hours earlier, the faint copper tang of blood that no amount of cleaning could fully erase from the scene of Jack's murder. And beneath it all, the scent of the forest beyond the walls, pine, earth, water, the complex perfume of his territory. William sat up slowly, his body responding with a fluidity that belied his 68 years. The bone-deep exhaustion that had claimed him after the transformation had receded, replaced by a vibrant energy that hummed through his muscles and nerves. He flexed his fingers experimentally, noting the absence of the arthritis that had plagued his joints for the past decade. The chronic ache in his left knee, companion since Vietnam, had diminished to a mere whisper of discomfort. The silver ring gleamed on his finger, catching the fading afternoon light that filtered through the bedroom window. William studied it, the wolf head crest seeming to watch him in return with eyes of polished stone. This small circle of metal had changed everything, unlocked the nature he had denied for 50 years, connected him to a legacy he had spent a lifetime running from. William rose from the bed, moving to the small bathroom adjoining Jack's bedroom. The face that stared back at him from the mirror above the sink was both familiar and startlingly different. His silver hair seemed thicker, more vital. The deep lines around his eyes and mouth had softened, not vanished, but reduced as though years had been gently erased. His posture was straighter, shoulders no longer hunched against chronic pain. Most striking were his eyes, still the same steel blue they had always been, but now containing flecks of gold that caught the light like tiny flames. The eyes of a predator, partially concealed behind a human mask. William splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it helping to center his thoughts. Tonight he would meet his nephew at the White Pine Tavern. Tonight he would begin to reclaim the family connections he had severed half a century ago. And tonight, perhaps, he would learn more about the enemy that had taken so much from him without his even knowing it. The Strigoi, Tanner, the creature that had murdered Jack, killed his parents, and now threatened both his pack and the town of Shadowcrest itself. William dressed quickly in his grandfather's clothes, the fabric soft with age but still serviceable. They fit better than they had any right to, as though tailored for him specifically. Another small mystery in a growing collection of impossibilities he was learning to accept. A glance at the bedside clock showed 6:37 p.m. The winter sun had already set, darkness gathering beneath the ancient trees surrounding the cabin. Nearly 8 hours of daylight lost to the exhaustion of transformation. William felt a momentary pang of guilt for sleeping while his pack secured the territory, investigated the Strigoi's hunting ground, protected what was his to defend. He would have to do better, be stronger, more worthy of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him by blood and circumstance. William moved into the main room of the cabin, finding it empty, but for the remnants of the morning's meal still on the table. A folded piece of paper rested atop a plate containing bread and cold meat, his name written on the outside in an elegant old-fashioned script that could only belong to Elena. He unfolded it, reading quickly. "William, I have gone to the apothecary to prepare what we will need in the coming days. Your pack patrols the boundaries. They report no further signs of the Strigoi or its thralls since dawn. Marcus has left you transportation in the shed behind the cabin. The keys are beneath the blue stone by the back door. Come to me when you wake. We have much to discuss before you meet your nephew." William refolded the note, tucking it into his pocket. The care with which his needs had been anticipated was both comforting and mildly unsettling. He had been alone for so long, a widower for over a decade, accustomed to the solitude of retirement. Now he found himself at the center of a complex web of relationships and responsibilities that had existed without his knowledge or participation for decades. He found the keys exactly where Elena had indicated, a small silver ring holding 3 keys of varying sizes beneath a smooth blue stone beside the cabin's rear entrance. The shed revealed an unexpected surprise. Jack's old pickup truck, a 1972 Ford that William remembered from their youth, meticulously maintained despite its nearly 50 years of service. The forest green paint was faded in places, the chrome bumper showed spots of rust, but the engine started with a healthy rumble when William turned the key. This small continuity, this tangible connection to his lost friend, brought a lump to William's throat. Jack had loved this truck, had bought it new with his first paycheck after returning from Vietnam. That he had kept it all these years spoke to a sentimentality William had not fully appreciated in his friend. The drive into Shadowcrest took 20 minutes, the narrow forest road eventually widening as it approached the outskirts of town. William felt a complex surge of emotion as the familiar landmarks of his childhood began to appear. The covered bridge over Blackwood Creek, named for his family centuries ago. The old Miller farm, now apparently converted to some kind of organic produce operation, judging by the hand-painted signs advertising heirloom vegetables and free-range eggs. The high school, expanded since his day but still recognizably the same red brick building where he and Jack had passed their adolescence. Shadowcrest itself had grown since William had last seen it, but not as dramatically as he might have expected over a 50-year absence. The main street still featured many of the same storefronts, though the names had changed. The old movie theater had been converted to a performance space for live music and community theater. A few chain establishments had infiltrated the previously independent business district: a Starbucks, a Subway sandwich shop, a small outpost of a regional bank. But the essential character remained. a small mountain town, isolated enough to maintain its identity, close enough to larger cities to avoid complete stagnation. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where newcomers were regarded with polite suspicion until they had proven themselves over years rather than months. The kind of place where ancient secrets could be preserved, hidden in plain sight behind a veneer of mundane small-town life. William drove slowly down Main Street, noting the curious glances directed at Jack's distinctive truck. No doubt the local gossip network was already humming with news of his arrival. The prodigal Blackwood returned after half a century's absence to bury his childhood friend. He would be recognized not for himself, but for his connection to Jack, to the Blackwood name, to a history he had only begun to understand. The Willow Street Apothecary stood on a corner near the town square, a Victorian-era building with mullioned windows and an elaborately carved wooden sign depicting various medicinal herbs surrounding a mortar and pestle. The display windows featured an eclectic mix of herbal remedies, local honey, handmade soaps, and what appeared to be crystal formations of various sizes and colors. To the casual observer, it would appear to be merely another New Age health store catering to tourists and the organically inclined. To William's newly enhanced senses, it radiated subtle power, like heat shimmer rising from sun-baked asphalt. Magic, he realized. Not the flashy, theatrical kind from movies and television, but something older, more fundamental. Earth magic, blood magic. The kind his grandfather had believed in, had practiced in small, careful ways that William had dismissed as superstition. He parked the truck across the street and sat watching the shop for several minutes. No customers entered or exited. The open sign hung in the door, but the interior appeared dim, illuminated only by what seemed to be candlelight rather than electric bulbs. Eventually, William's curiosity overcame his hesitation. He crossed the street and pushed open the door, a small bell announcing his arrival with a melodious chime. The scent hit him immediately. Herbs, hundreds of them, dried and hanging from the ceiling beams in neat bundles. Lavender, sage, rosemary. More exotic plants his human knowledge couldn't identify, but his wolf senses cataloged instinctively. Beneath that botanical layer came other smells. Beeswax candles, the mineral tang of various crystals and stones, old leather from the books that lined one entire wall, and the distinctive copper scent of blood, fresh enough to raise the hairs on the back of his neck. "I am not injured," Elena's voice came from the back of the shop. "The blood is willingly given for the protections we will need." She appeared in a doorway partially concealed by hanging strings of dried flowers, wiping her hands on a small towel. She had changed from her earlier attire into a simple dress of deep burgundy, her silver hair pulled back in a complex braid that emphasized the timeless quality of her features. Around her neck hung a pendant of amber containing what appeared to be a preserved insect of some kind, glowing with a faint internal light that might have been a trick of the candles. "You look better," she observed, those unusual eyes taking in his appearance with the thoroughness of a physician. "The territory's energy is already healing you, reclaiming you." "I feel better," William admitted, "stronger, younger in some ways." "It will continue," she said, moving toward a wooden counter that held an antique brass cash register and several leather-bound books. "Not to youth precisely, but to the prime of what a Blackwood alpha should be. The territory needs its protector at full strength." William approached the counter, noting the various items laid out with careful precision. Small cloth bags filled with herbs, vials of liquids in different colors, what appeared to be silver bullets similar to those he had found in Jack's fireplace, and a map of Shadowcrest and the surrounding forest marked with symbols he didn't recognize. "You said we had things to discuss," he prompted. "Before I meet Daniel at the tavern." Elena nodded, her expression growing more serious. "The Strigoi is not working alone," she said without preamble. "It has human allies, powerful ones." William frowned. "Human allies? Why would anyone willingly work with such a creature?" "For the same reasons humans have always allied themselves with darkness," Elena replied. "Power, wealth, the promise of immortality." She gestured to the map spread on the counter. 3 months ago, a company called North Star Development purchased several large parcels of land bordering the Blackwood territory. They have filed permits for an extensive resort complex, hotel, golf course, luxury homes. The kind of development that would bring hundreds, perhaps thousands of people to this area. William studied the map, noting the areas highlighted in red that surrounded the territory he had run with his pack just hours ago. Feeding grounds, he said, understanding dawning. The Strigoi is creating a self-replenishing food supply. Tourists, seasonal residents, people who wouldn't be immediately missed if they disappeared. Elena nodded grimly. Precisely. And the human face of this operation, the name on all the legal documents, the man speaking at town council meetings about jobs and economic opportunity. She slid a newspaper clipping across the counter. William picked it up, staring at the photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, addressing what appeared to be a town meeting. Richard Tanner, he read from the caption. CEO of North Star Development presents plans for Shadow Ridge Resort and residential community. Sheriff Tanner's brother, Elena confirmed, or so he claims. In reality, they are the same entity, the Strigoi appearing as two different human identities. William set down the clipping, processing this new information. It can do that? Maintain two separate human disguises? The more powerful Strigoi can maintain multiple forms, multiple identities. It requires significant energy, frequent feeding, but it allows them to manipulate human systems with remarkable effectiveness. Elena's amber eyes flashed with anger. This one has been playing a long game, positioning itself within the power structure of Shadowcrest while simultaneously creating the mechanism for its feast. And the town council is just going along with this? No one questions it? Some do, Elena said. Jack was one. He began investigating North Star when they first arrived, suspicious of their interest in land that had never held commercial value before. He discovered financial irregularities, permit applications that were approved despite environmental concerns, council members who changed their votes after private meetings with Richard Tanner. She paused. 3 weeks ago, he found connections between North Star and a series of disappearances in other small towns where they had developed similar properties. That's when he wrote to you. And the Strigoi killed him for it, William said, the pieces falling into place, used its sheriff disguise to cover up the murder. But why not kill me as soon as I arrived? Why the charade at the cabin? It needed to know what you knew, what Jack might have told you. Elena began gathering the items from the counter, placing them carefully in a leather satchel. And it needed to assess you. The return of a Blackwood Alpha after so many years. It would have sensed your bloodline immediately. But until you transformed, until you claimed the pack, you were an unknown quantity, a potential threat, but also potentially vulnerable. William watched her methodical preparations, a new worry forming. These human allies, how deep does their influence go? How much of the town is compromised? Not as much as the Strigoi would like, Elena replied. Shadowcrest has old protections, old families who remember the ancient ways, even if they don't fully believe them anymore. But money is persuasive, and the promise of economic revival in a town that has struggled since the logging industry declined. She shrugged. People see what they want to see, believe what benefits them. And my nephew? Where does he fit in all this? Elena's hands paused in their work. Daniel Blackwood returned to Shadowcrest 5 years ago, after his father's death. He took a position teaching history at the high school. By all accounts, he is well liked, respected. Her expression grew troubled. But he has been asking questions about the Blackwood family, about the old legends, about the strange animal attacks that have increased in the surrounding forests. His curiosity has not gone unnoticed. A chill ran down William's spine. By the Strigoi, you mean? Yes. Daniel has been watched, followed. So far, he has been protected by his bloodline, diluted though it may be. The Strigoi is cautious around those with Blackwood blood, even those who cannot transform. Elena resumed packing her satchel. But that protection has limits, especially now that you have returned, now that the Strigoi knows the threat you represent. It will target him, William said, the realization striking with awful clarity. To get to me, to draw me out. Yes, Elena confirmed quietly. Which is why your meeting tonight is both necessary and dangerous. He needs to understand what he is involved in, needs the protection that knowledge can provide. But the very act of you meeting him will confirm the Strigoi's suspicions about his importance to you. William paced the small shop, the wolf within growing restless at the thought of his newly discovered family being threatened. I should cancel. Stay away from him. Keep him safe through distance. That time has passed, Elena said firmly. The Strigoi knows you are here, knows you have transformed, knows you have claimed the pack. It will assume a connection to Daniel regardless of your actions now. She closed the satchel with a decisive motion. The best protection you can offer him is the truth, and these. She handed him a small cloth bag that clinked softly with its contents. Silver amulets, she explained, blessed and bound to the Blackwood bloodline. They will alert you if he is in danger, will burn any Strigoi that attempts to touch him. Not enough to kill, but enough to slow an attack, perhaps allow escape. William accepted the bag, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. Will he believe any of this? Will he think I'm insane? He has Blackwood blood, Elena replied simply. Diluted, yes. Unable to transform, yes. But still carrying the instincts, the connection to this land and its mysteries. And he has been searching for answers his entire life, more intensely since returning to Shadowcrest, finding his father's journals, speaking with those who remembered the old stories. Her amber eyes held his. He is more prepared to believe than you might think. William nodded, tucking the bag into his pocket. I should go. It's nearly time to meet him. One moment, Elena said, reaching beneath the counter. She produced a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same wolf head symbol that adorned his ring. You will need this. It belonged to your grandfather. William opened the box cautiously, finding a Colt .45 revolver nestled in velvet lining. The weapon was old but immaculately maintained, its wooden grip worn smooth by decades of handling. The barrel and chamber gleamed with recent cleaning, and William could smell the distinctive scent of gun oil. Beside the revolver lay 6 silver bullets, their surfaces etched with tiny symbols he didn't recognize. I'm not sure a gun will make much difference against something like Tanner, William said, though his hand automatically checked the weapon's action, finding it smooth and responsive. The detective in him, the soldier, appreciating fine craftsmanship regardless of its efficacy. Silver bullets blessed by a Vrajatoire will make more difference than you might imagine, Elena replied with a faint smile. They cannot kill a Strigoi of Tanner's age and power, but they can wound it severely, slow it, force it to retreat and heal. In the right moment, that could mean the difference between life and death. William nodded, loading the revolver with practiced efficiency despite the years since he had regularly carried such a weapon. He checked the safety, then tucked the gun into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, his grandfather's flannel shirt hanging loose enough to conceal its presence. The White Pine is 3 blocks east, Elena said, moving toward the door with him. Daniel will be waiting. After you have spoken with him, bring him here if he is willing. There are things he should know that I can explain better than you can at this point. And if he's not willing, if he thinks I'm a lunatic and wants nothing to do with any of this? Elena's expression softened slightly. Then we will protect him from a distance as best we can, but I do not think that will be the case. He is his father's son, and his uncle's nephew. She reached up, her cool fingers brushing against his cheek in a gesture that might have been simply supportive, but carried an undercurrent of something more. The Blackwood men have always been stubborn, proud, difficult, but never cowards, never willing to hide from truth once it stands before them. The touch lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary, and William found himself acutely aware of her scent, her proximity, the subtle power that radiated from her deceptively fragile form. Then she stepped back, the moment passing, her expression once again composed and practical. Go, she said. I will be here when you return. The White Pine Tavern occupied the ground floor of what had once been Shadowcrest's premier hotel, a 3-story Victorian structure that had managed to survive both the Great Depression and the decline of the timber industry that had once been the town's economic backbone. The upper floors had been converted to apartments sometime in the 1970s, but the tavern remained much as William remembered it from his youth. Dark wood paneling, a long mahogany bar salvaged from a San Francisco establishment after the 1906 earthquake, brass fixtures polished to a soft glow by generations of bartenders. The dinner crowd was sparse on this rainy weeknight, perhaps a dozen patrons scattered among the tables and booths. William paused in the doorway, his enhanced senses immediately cataloging each person present. None bore the distinctive wrongness he now associated with the Strigoi or its thralls. Just ordinary humans enjoying an evening meal, a drink after work, the simple pleasures of small-town life. A young man sat alone in a booth near the back, nursing a beer, his attention apparently focused on the book open before him. Even without Elena's description, William would have recognized his nephew immediately. Daniel had the Blackwood features, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the broad shoulders that characterized the men of his family. His hair was dark brown, rather than the silver that marked the full-blooded werewolves of the pack. But his eyes, when he glanced up at William's entrance, held the same intensity, the same intelligence that William recognized from his own reflection. Those eyes widened slightly in recognition, though they had never met. Daniel closed his book and sat up straighter as William approached the booth, his expression a complex mixture of wariness, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "Daniel Blackwood?" William said, stopping at the edge of the table. The young man nodded. "Uncle William, I presume." He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "I wasn't entirely sure you'd come." William slid into the booth, studying his nephew more closely. Up close, the family resemblance was even more pronounced. Daniel had Thomas's eyes, the same deep brown that had always seemed to hold more knowledge than they should. But there was something of William's mother in the shape of his face, the high cheekbones and slightly pointed chin that the wolf transformation had only emphasized in William's own features. "I wasn't entirely sure I should," William admitted, keeping his voice low. "Our family history is complicated." Daniel's mouth quirked in a half-smile that was painfully reminiscent of Thomas in his youth. "That's the understatement of the century." He took a sip of his beer, watching William over the rim of the glass. "I saw you last night, in the forest, at the campsite." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I saw what you are." William tensed, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. The nearest patrons were 2 booths away, a middle-aged couple focused entirely on each other, and the bartender was busy restocking glasses at the far end of the bar. "What exactly do you think you saw?" William asked carefully. "A wolf the size of a small horse," Daniel replied without hesitation, "with silver fur and golden eyes. A wolf that understood human speech. A wolf that could have killed me, but chose not to." He leaned forward slightly. "A Blackwood wolf. Like in all the stories my grandmother told me. Like in my father's journals." William said nothing for a moment, assessing his nephew's demeanor. There was no fear in the young man's face, no revulsion or disbelief, only intense curiosity and a hunger for confirmation that spoke of years spent searching for answers. "Your father kept journals?" William asked, deflecting slightly while he decided how much to reveal. Daniel nodded. "Started them when he was a teenager, continued until just before his death. Hundreds of pages about the Blackwood legacy, the family connection to the wolves of Shadowcrest Forest, the responsibilities he felt but couldn't fulfill." Something darker flickered across his youthful features. The changes he felt happening in his body during the full moon. Changes that never completed, that drove him to drink to suppress them. The guilt that had become William's constant companion since his return to Shadowcrest intensified. "Thomas suffered because of me," he said quietly. "Because I ran away from my responsibilities that should never have fallen to him." "The Alpha," Daniel said, the word hanging between them like a physical presence. "That's what grandmother called it, the alpha power, passed down through the Blackwood line from father to eldest son. Except my grandfather died before my father was ready and you were gone, so there was no one to guide him through whatever was supposed to happen. He studied William intently. Until you came back. Until last night. William glanced around once more, then made his decision. He extended his hand across the table, palm up, the silver ring clearly visible. This belonged to your grandfather. Before that, to his father. It's been passed down through our family for generations. It helps control the change. Daniel stared at the ring, recognition dawning in his eyes. Dad had drawings of this in his journals. Said his father wore it every day of his life. Said it was the key to the Blackwood power. He reached out hesitantly, stopping just short of touching the silver band. May I? William nodded, and Daniel's fingers brushed lightly over the wolf-head crest. The moment of contact sent a visible shiver through the younger man, his eyes widening in surprise. It's warm, he whispered, and it recognizes me somehow. I can feel it. Blood calls to blood, William said, remembering Elena's words from their first meeting. The Blackwood legacy recognizes its own, even those who cannot fully transform. Daniel withdrew his hand slowly, his expression thoughtful. So it's all true. Everything in Dad's journals, the werewolves, the pack, the responsibility to protect Shadowcrest from, he hesitated, from the darkness that hunts in these woods. William completed the thought. Yes, it's all true. More real and more dangerous than I ever allowed myself to believe until I came back. Until I saw Jack's body. Until I met the creature that killed him. Daniel's face hardened at the mention of Jack Holloway. Sheriff Tanner ruled it a heart attack. I knew that was bullshit. Jack was healthy as a horse, and he was helping me research the connection between North Star development and the increase in missing hikers in the National Forest. His voice dropped again. The day before he died, he told me he'd found something big, said he was contacting someone who could help. Me, William confirmed grimly. He sent me a letter, said things were happening here that connected to what happened the summer before we both left for Vietnam, said people were disappearing, said he was being watched. He was, Daniel said. We both were. Still are, I think. Men in black SUVs with tinted windows, parked outside the school where I teach, following me to the library, to research sites in the forest. He took another sip of his beer, his hand steady despite the weight of their conversation. I thought they were just corporate security, North Star being paranoid about environmental activists or something. But it's worse than that, isn't it? Much worse, William agreed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the cloth bag Elena had given him. These are for you, silver amulets that will offer some protection. Not enough, but some. He slid the bag across the table. The creature that killed Jack, that's watching you. It's not human. Never was. And it has plans for Shadowcrest that go far beyond luxury resorts and golf courses. Daniel opened the bag, examining one of the small silver pendants. It depicted the same wolf head as William's ring, though simpler, less detailed. The strigoi, he said, surprising William with his knowledge of the term. That's what grandmother called it. The ancient enemy of our kind, the blood drinker, the night stalker. He looked up, his expression deadly serious. Sheriff Tanner. William nodded, impressed and concerned by how much his nephew had already pieced together. Tanner, and his brother Richard, the CEO of North Star. They're the same entity, different human disguises. Daniel absorbed this without visible shock, another indication of how much research he had already conducted. What does it want? Why here? Why now? Power, William replied simply. This land is special, a nexus of natural energies that creatures like us can tap into, draw strength from. My ancestors chose it for that reason 3 centuries ago. The strigoi wants to corrupt that power, feed from it, use it to create a self-sustaining hunting ground disguised as a resort community. And you've returned to stop it, Daniel stated, to reclaim your position as alpha, to protect the territory. William held his nephew's gaze steadily. I've returned because Jack asked me to, because I ran from my responsibilities 50 years ago, and others have paid the price for my cowardice, because it's time I accepted what I am and what that means." He leaned forward slightly. "But I need to know where you stand in all this, Daniel. How much you want to be involved. How much risk you're willing to accept." Daniel didn't hesitate. "I've been looking for answers my entire life, trying to understand why my father drank himself to death, why my grandmother spoke of wolves and silver bullets and blood oaths on her deathbed, why I've always felt connected to these forests in ways I couldn't explain." His expression hardened with determination. "I've been involved since the day I was born a Blackwood, whether I knew it or not. The only difference now is that I finally understand what that means." William studied his nephew, seeing the same stubborn resolve he recognized in himself, in his grandfather, in generations of Blackwood men who had stood between their community and the darkness that threatened it. Elena had been right. Daniel had been searching for this his entire life. "There's someone you need to meet," William said, making his decision. "Someone who can explain things better than I can. She's been protecting what remains of the pack since my grandfather died, since I abandoned my responsibilities." "The witch," Daniel said, surprising William once again. "Elena Vasile. Grandmother mentioned her too. Said she was ancient, powerful, bound to our family by oaths older than the country itself." William couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. "You've done your homework." "History teacher," Daniel replied with a matching smile that emphasized their shared bloodline. "Research is what I do." The smile faded, replaced by solemnity. "That, and trying to understand why these forests call to me every full moon. Why I dream of running on 4 legs through moonlit clearings, even though I know I can never truly transform." The longing in his nephew's voice struck William deeply. Daniel had grown up with the instincts of a werewolf, but without the ability to fulfill them, had felt the pull of the moon, the call of the wild, but been unable to answer. It seemed a crueler fate in some ways than William's decades of ignorance and denial. "We should go," William said, glancing at his watch. "Elena is waiting at the apothecary's shop. There's much you need to know, and not all of it should be discussed in public." He hesitated, then added, "You should know this isn't without risk. The Strigoi already suspects your connection to me, to the pack. Meeting with me tonight confirms those suspicions, makes you a potential target." Daniel slipped the silver amulet around his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt. "I've been a potential target since I started investigating North Star," he replied. "At least now I'll understand why." He closed his book, revealing the title, Folklore and Mythology of the Pacific Northwest, with a bookmark protruding from a chapter labeled Shapeshifters and Spirit Animals in Indigenous Traditions. "My car is outside," William offered. "The apothecary is just a few blocks, but better not to be seen walking together on the main street," Daniel finished the thought. "Not with Sheriff Tanner's deputies potentially watching." He nodded toward a rear exit. "I'll go out the back way, circle around to the alley behind the apothecary. Less chance of being spotted." William nodded, approving of his nephew's caution. 20 minutes. I'll go first. Make sure the way is clear." Daniel extended his hand across the table. "I've waited my entire life to understand what it means to be a Blackwood," he said softly. "I'm not going to let a blood-sucking monster stop me now that I'm finally getting answers." William clasped his nephew's hand, feeling the connection of shared blood, shared heritage, even without the full werewolf bond. 20 minutes, he repeated. "Be careful." The rain had intensified during their conversation, falling in sheets that reduced visibility and muffled the sounds of the small town. William drove the short distance to the apothecary, watching his mirrors for any sign of surveillance. The streets were largely deserted, most sensible residents having sought shelter from the downpour. He parked Jack's truck in the small lot behind the shop, backing it in to allow for a quick departure if necessary. Elena opened the rear door before he could knock, as though she had sensed his approach. Perhaps she had, given her mysterious abilities. The shop was darker now, illuminated only by candles that cast dancing shadows across the walls, lined with dried herbs and ancient texts. "Your meeting went well," she said, again not a question but a statement of fact. He is coming." William nodded, shaking rainwater from his hair. "He knows more than I expected. His grandmother told him stories. His father left journals. He's been researching for years." "Thomas Blackwood could not transform, but he carried the knowledge, the instinct," Elena replied, moving to a small wood stove where a kettle steamed gently. And Martha Blackwood was a wise woman who understood the importance of preserving the old ways, even when her son could not fulfill them. She poured hot water into an earthenware teapot. "The blood remembers, even when diluted. The territory calls to all who carry the Blackwood name in one way or another." William watched her precise, graceful movements as she prepared what appeared to be an herbal tea of some kind. Daniel said Thomas felt the changes beginning during the full moon, but they never completed, that he drank to suppress them. Elena nodded sadly. "The partial change is more painful than the full transformation. The body begins the process, but cannot complete it without the alpha power to guide it. Thomas suffered greatly for many years." She glanced up at William, "as did many others after you left." The guilt that had become William's constant companion intensified, but before he could respond, a soft knock came at the rear door. Elena nodded for William to answer it, continuing her preparation of the tea. Daniel stood on the threshold, his dark hair plastered to his head by the rain, his eyes bright with anticipation despite his sodden appearance. He hesitated a moment, then stepped inside, his gaze immediately drawn to Elena, who had turned to face him with the teapot still in her hands. "Daniel Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying the same melodious quality it had when William had first met her in the rain outside the cemetery. "You have your father's eyes, and your grandmother's spirit." Daniel stared at her, an expression of recognition crossing his features, despite the impossibility of them having met before. You haven't changed," he whispered. "You look exactly like the photograph in my grandmother's album from 1972. Elena smiled slightly, setting down the teapot. "One of the few times I allowed myself to be captured by a camera. Martha was very persuasive." She gestured to a small round table near the wood stove. "Sit. We have much to discuss, and little time. The storm coming is not just the one outside these walls." Daniel moved to the table as though in a trance, his eyes never leaving Elena. William joined them, noting the subtle changes in the shop since his earlier visit. Protective symbols had been drawn on the windows in what appeared to be a mixture of ash and some viscous substance he preferred not to identify. Small bundles of herbs burned in brass dishes at each corner of the room, producing a sweet, pungent smoke that seemed to cling to the ceiling without dispersing. Preparations for war, William realized. Magical defenses against the creature that had already killed once and would undoubtedly kill again before this was over. Elena poured the tea into 3 mismatched cups, the liquid a deep amber that reminded William of her unusual eyes. "Drink," she instructed. "It will help clarify your thoughts, strengthen your resistance to the Stragoy's influence." Daniel accepted his cup without hesitation, sipping the hot liquid with an expression of surprise. "It tastes like the forest," he said. "Pine and earth and—" He frowned, searching for words. "Moonlight," William supplied, tasting his own cup. "It tastes like moonlight feels on your skin during the change." Elena nodded, pleased with their descriptions. "The essence of the territory, distilled into physical form, it strengthens the connection to the land, to its power." She focused on Daniel. "For you, it will enhance what small abilities your diluted bloodline still carries, the sensitivity to supernatural presences, the resistance to certain forms of harm, the ability to sense the pack bonds, even if you cannot fully participate in them." Daniel stared into his cup, then back at Elena. "You really are a witch," he said, not a question, but a statement of acceptance. "My grandmother said you'd been protecting our family for generations, that you were bound to us by some ancient pact." "The Covenant," Elena confirmed. "A magical binding between my power, the Blackwood Pack, and the territory itself." a three-way exchange of energy, protection, and obligation that has maintained the balance here for centuries. Her amber eyes shifted to William. A balance disrupted when the alpha bloodline was broken, but not destroyed. A balance that can be restored now that William has returned to claim his heritage. Daniel turned to William, his expression intensely curious. What was it like, the transformation, the first time? William considered the question, searching for words to describe an experience that defied ordinary language. Painful, exhilarating, the most natural thing I've ever done, despite having denied it my entire adult life. He flexed his hand, the silver ring catching the candlelight. It was like discovering a part of myself that had always been there, just beneath the surface, like remembering how to breathe after being underwater too long. And the pack? Daniel pressed. Grandmother spoke of pack bonds, mental connections, shared consciousness. Not exactly shared consciousness, William clarified. More awareness, knowing where each member is without seeing them, feeling their emotions, their physical state, communicating in ways beyond words. He smiled slightly at a memory from the previous night. Running together through the forest, coordinating a hunt without a single vocalization, moving as one entity with many bodies. The naked longing on Daniel's face was painful to witness. This was a young man who had grown up feeling the echo of those connections without ever being able to experience them fully, who had dreamed of running with the pack while knowing he never could. There are other ways to be part of this, Elena said gently, clearly reading Daniel's expression as easily as William did. The pack needs human allies, eyes and ears in places werewolves cannot go without raising suspicion, keepers of knowledge, guardians of history. She glanced at William. Bridges between the supernatural world and the human one. Daniel seemed to absorb this, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Dad's journals mentioned something similar, said that not every Blackwood through history could transform, but all played a role in protecting the territory. He looked back to William. Is that why you're here? Why you've returned after all these years? To restore the balance? William set down his cup, choosing his words carefully. I came back to find out who killed Jack. I didn't know about any of this until after I arrived. He gestured to encompass the shop, Elena, the supernatural reality he had denied for decades. I spent 50 years running from what I am, pretending I was just an ordinary man, building a life based on that lie. He met Daniel's gaze directly. I'm here now because I finally realized that running away doesn't free you from responsibility. It just shifts the burden onto others less equipped to carry it. The honesty of the statement hung in the air between them. Daniel nodded slowly, something like respect kindling in his eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Recognition of a shared burden, a shared bloodline, a shared fate. So what happens now? He asked. The Strigoi knows you're back, knows you've transformed, knows you're a threat to whatever it's planning with this resort development. Now we prepare for war, Elena answered before William could. The Strigoi will not abandon its plans easily. It has invested too much time, too many resources. It will escalate its attacks, create more thralls, attempt to isolate and eliminate those who stand in its way. Her amber eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. It will target the pack, the remaining Blackwoods, anyone associated with them. Including me, Daniel said, making it a statement rather than a question. Yes, William confirmed grimly. I'm sorry for that, for pulling you into danger. Daniel shook his head. I was already in danger, already investigating North Star, already suspected by Tanner. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But now at least I understand why, and I'm not alone anymore. The simple statement affected William more deeply than he would have expected. He had been alone for so long, had chosen solitude over connection, independence over responsibility. To hear his nephew, this young man who had every reason to resent him for abandoning the family, express solidarity instead of bitterness was humbling. No, William agreed quietly. You're not alone. Not anymore. Elena rose from the table, moving to the counter where her leather satchel rested. "There are preparations to make, protections to put in place." She withdrew several items, small cloth bags similar to the one William had given Daniel, vials of dark liquid, what appeared to be maps of the town and surrounding forest. "Daniel, your home must be warded against the Strigoi's influence. These will help." She handed him several of the cloth bags. "Place them above doors and windows. Do not remove the contents, no matter how unusual they may appear." Daniel accepted the bags without question, tucking them carefully into his jacket pocket. "What about my students, my colleagues? Anyone could be targeted as a way to get to me." "The Strigoi prefers isolation," Elena replied. "It will try to separate you from potential witnesses or assistants before attacking directly. Be particularly cautious when alone, especially after dark. Stay in public places when possible. The silver amulet will help alert you to the presence of the Strigoi or its thralls, but it is not infallible." William watched the exchange, struck by his nephew's calm acceptance of these extraordinary circumstances. Daniel was adjusting to the revelation of supernatural reality with remarkable composure, integrating new information into his worldview with an adaptability that spoke to both his intelligence and his deep-seated desire for understanding. "What about direct confrontation?" Daniel asked, his tone shifting to something more tactical. "Silver weapons? Strategies for fighting these creatures if necessary?" Elena glanced at William, a silent communication passing between them. It was William who answered, his voice grave but honest. "You're not equipped for direct combat with the Strigoi or its thralls," he said bluntly. "Even with silver weapons, even with magical protection. You lack the physical abilities of the pack. Your role will be intelligence gathering, research, coordination with Elena, while the pack handles the direct threat." He expected resistance, perhaps indignation at being sidelined. Instead, Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Dad's journals mentioned the same limitation for non-transformed Blackwoods, said they served as strategists, knowledge keepers, the brains, while the transformed pack members were the muscle. He looked up at William. "I've spent my entire academic career studying history, researching local folklore, documenting patterns of mysterious occurrences in this region. That's how I can contribute. That's how I can honor the Blackwood legacy, even without the ability to transform." William felt a surge of pride in his nephew's practical assessment of his strengths and limitations. "We'll need that knowledge, that research, especially anything related to the Strigoi's previous activities in this area, its patterns, its vulnerabilities." "I've been compiling exactly that since I returned to Shadowcrest," Daniel replied. "Started as general interest in local history, evolved into focused research when I found Dad's journals, became an obsession after I connected the pattern of disappearances to North Star's previous development sites." He hesitated, then added, "Jack was helping me. He had contacts in law enforcement in other jurisdictions where North Star had built similar resorts. He was gathering evidence of a pattern." "Evidence the Strigoi could not allow to become public," Elena said grimly. "Hence his murder. And now it will be coming for anyone else involved in that research," William concluded, the protective instinct of the alpha rising within him. "We need to secure whatever information Jack collected, and whatever you've compiled, Daniel. It could be crucial to understanding the full scope of what we're facing." "Most of my research is at my apartment," Daniel said. "Digital files on my laptop, physical documents in filing cabinets. Jack kept his share at the cabin, hidden in various locations. The fireplace was just one of them." William exchanged a glance with Elena, both of them registering the implications simultaneously. If Jack had hidden additional evidence beyond what William had already discovered, it might explain why the Strigoi had staged his death to appear natural rather than simply burning the cabin to destroy all potential evidence. "We need to return to Jack's cabin," William said decisively. "Search it thoroughly, find whatever else he might have hidden there." "And we need to secure Daniel's research as well," Elena added, already gathering supplies into her satchel. "The storm provides good cover. Most humans will be indoors. Visibility is poor for surveillance." Daniel watched their preparations with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. "This is really happening, isn't it? We're really preparing for a supernatural war against an ancient vampire in 21st century Oregon." William paused in helping Elena pack, struck by the absurdity of the situation when framed in those terms. Yet the weight of the silver ring on his finger, the memory of his transformation under the full moon, the knowledge of what had happened to Jack, all of it confirmed the reality they now faced. "Yes," he said simply, "we are, and it's already claimed too many lives." Daniel squared his shoulders, the Blackwood determination evident in his posture. "Then let's make sure it claims no more, starting tonight." As if in answer to his words, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the small shop, rattling the windows in their frames. The candles flickered wildly, casting lurching shadows across the walls. Lightning illuminated the street outside in harsh, white brilliance, and in that frozen moment of illumination, William caught sight of a figure standing across the street, watching the apothecary with unnatural stillness. A figure that, despite the downpour, remained perfectly dry. A figure whose eyes reflected the lightning with an inner fire that had nothing to do with natural reflection. Sheriff Tanner, the Strigoi, watching, waiting. When the lightning faded and darkness returned, the figure was gone. But the message had been delivered, the intention clear. The enemy knew they had gathered, knew they were preparing, knew the war for Shadowcrest had begun in earnest, and it was hungry for blood. Retry K Vietia Part 3. Theodan Vidojai minimum 6,000 words, maximum 8,000 words. Kom su yung doget ngang zukek chapter orchestrated werewolf narrative continuation with character development and conflict escalation. Tens. The user is asking me to continue writing Part 4 of the story I've been developing. This is a creative writing exercise where I'm creating a supernatural werewolf fiction story based on a previously established outline. Let me review what I've written so far and where the story stands. 1. Part 1 introduced William Blackwood, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran who returns to his hometown of Shadowcrest for his friend Jack's funeral, only to discover Jack was murdered. William encounters Elena, a mysterious woman who reveals that William is the last alpha of a werewolf bloodline. William transforms into a werewolf during the full moon. 2. Part 2 covered William's first transformation, his introduction to the pack, and the discovery of a Strigoi's vampire, Killing Ground. William also meets his nephew Daniel, who recognizes him from seeing him as a wolf. 3. Part 3 showed William meeting with his nephew Daniel at the White Pine Tavern, then bringing him to meet Elena at her apothecary. They discussed the Strigoi threat and its connection to North Star development. The part ended with William spotting Sheriff Tanner, the Strigoi, watching them from across the street. For Part 4, based on the outlined structure, I should focus on Thak Thuk Quinlook and Tin U Moon, power struggle and late love, which includes William proving leadership to younger pack members, developing feelings for Elena, William's son appearing and discovering his father's secret, family conflict between loyalty and responsibility. This part should 1. Further develop the relationship between William and Elena. 2. Show William asserting his authority as alpha. 3. Introduce William's son as a new character. 4. Create tension between family loyalty and pack responsibility. 5. Continue the conflict with the Strigoi. I'll write this section maintaining the same tone and style as the previous parts. Cinematic prose with emotional intensity, rhythmic pacing for good speech flow, limited but impactful dialogue, and targeting male readers over 60. Let me begin writing Part 4 now. Dusk of the Alpha. The Strigoi's appearance outside the apothecary cast a pall over their planning, transforming theoretical danger into imminent threat. William's instincts, as both detective and alpha, urged immediate action, securing Daniel's research materials before the Strigoi could destroy them, gathering the pack for protection, establishing defensive positions throughout Shadowcrest. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, extinguishing candles and gathering essential supplies into her leather satchel. "We cannot stay here," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency of her movements. "The shop has protections, but they were not designed to withstand direct assault from a Strigoi of Tanner's power." Daniel watched her preparations with the wide-eyed fascination of an academic suddenly thrust into the reality he had only studied. "Where do we go? My apartment isn't safe if Tanner knows I'm involved." "The cabin," William decided, his voice carrying the unconscious authority of the Alpha. "Jack's cabin is on Blackwood land. The territory itself offers protection the Strigoi cannot easily overcome. The pack will meet us there." He turned to Elena, their eyes meeting in silent communication that felt as natural as breathing. "Can you establish temporary wards? Enough to secure it until morning?" Elena nodded, patting the satchel at her hip. "I brought what we need for that purpose, but we must move quickly. The storm provides cover, but also advantage to creatures that hunt in darkness." William led them through the shop's rear exit to where Jack's truck waited in the small parking area, rain drumming against its metal roof with almost deafening intensity. Daniel slid into the middle of the bench seat, Elena taking the passenger side position nearest the door. The proximity in the cab filled William's enhanced senses with their combined scents. Daniel's carrying the familiar Blackwood markers overlaid with soap and coffee and the musty aroma of old books. Elena's more complex perfume of herbs and ancient magic, and something essentially feminine that stirred responses William had thought long dormant. He pushed the distracting thoughts aside, focusing on the treacherous drive ahead as he navigated the rain-slicked streets of Shadowcrest. His enhanced vision penetrated the downpour better than the truck's aging headlights, allowing him to spot potential dangers before they fully materialized from the gloom. "We're being followed," Elena announced calmly as they reached the town limits, her gaze fixed on the side mirror. "Black SUV, 2 vehicles back, moving without headlights." William checked the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of the vehicle through sheets of rain. "Tanner?" "No," Elena replied after a moment's consideration. "Thralls. I can sense them. 3, perhaps 4, recently turned, hungry, reckless." Daniel twisted in his seat, peering through the rear window despite Elena's restraining hand on his arm. "I've seen that vehicle before, parked outside the high school, following me to research sites." William assessed their options with the rapid calculation of a combat veteran. The narrow forest road leading to Jack's cabin offered few opportunities for evasive maneuvers, and the aging pickup stood little chance of outrunning a modern SUV in a straight chase. "We need to reach the territory boundary," Elena said, seeming to follow his thoughts. "Once on Blackwood land, my magic combined with your alpha presence will be stronger. We can make a stand there if necessary." William nodded, pressing the accelerator as much as he dared on the rain-slick pavement. The old truck responded valiantly, engine roaring as they accelerated along the winding road into the forest. The headlights of the pursuing vehicle flashed on suddenly, illuminating the truck's cab with harsh white light that reflected blindingly from the rain-streaked mirrors. "They're making their move," William said grimly, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Hold on." The SUV surged forward, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. William could see it clearly now in the mirrors, a black Ford Expedition with tinted windows and no license plates. The front passenger window lowered, and something protruded from the opening. A rifle barrel. "Down!" William shouted, shoving Daniel toward the floorboard as the first shot rang out, punching through the rear window of the truck cab in a shower of safety glass. Elena ducked in the same instant, her movements preternaturally fluid as she reached into her satchel and withdrew something that glinted silver in the flashing lights. A second shot followed, then a third, both missing their targets, as William executed a series of evasive swerves that sent the truck fishtailing dangerously on the wet asphalt. The SUV matched his movements with inhuman precision, maintaining its position directly behind them, the shooter adjusting his aim for another attempt. "We can't outrun them," William growled, feeling the change stirring beneath his skin, the wolf responding to the threat with primal fury. The silver ring on his finger pulsed with heat, simultaneously feeding and controlling the transformation urge. Elena straightened slightly, the object in her hand revealed as an ornate silver dagger inscribed with symbols similar to those on William's ring. "We don't need to outrun them," she said calmly. "We just need to reach the boundary." She leaned toward William, her free hand touching his arm with surprising intimacy. "Half a mile ahead. Feel for it. The territory will call to you. Your blood will recognize it." William focused beyond the immediate danger, beyond the mechanical task of keeping the truck on the road, reaching outward with senses that transcended the physical. And there it was, a presence ahead, a subtle shift in the very fabric of reality. The boundary between ordinary woodland and Blackwood territory, marked not by fences or signs, but by something more fundamental, more primal. His blood sang in response, the wolf within howling in recognition of ancestral domain, home ground, power source. William pressed the accelerator harder, the old truck protesting as its engine strained toward redline. "Almost there," he said through gritted teeth as another shot punched through the rear of the cab, narrowly missing Daniel, who remained crouched on the floorboard. Elena began to chant in a language that sounded ancient, primal, her voice carrying, despite the cacophony of engine noise, gunfire, and pounding rain. The silver dagger in her hand glowed with increasing brightness, casting strange shadows across her determined features. William felt the moment they crossed the boundary, a physical sensation like passing through an invisible membrane, a surge of energy that set every nerve ending tingling, a sense of homecoming so profound it momentarily took his breath away. The truck seemed to respond as well, surging forward with renewed vigor as though drawing strength from the territory itself. Behind them, the pursuing SUV hit the boundary at full speed and abruptly slewed sideways, as if it had struck an invisible barrier. The vehicle spun completely around, tires losing traction on the wet road, before slamming into a massive pine tree with a sickening crunch of metal and breaking glass. Elena's chanting reached a crescendo, the silver dagger flaring with blinding light that filled the truck cab for one heart-stopping moment before subsiding to a steady glow. "They cannot cross now," she said, her voice slightly breathless from the magical exertion. "The boundary is sealed against them, against anything tainted by the Strigoi's influence." William slowed the truck, glancing in the rearview mirror at the wrecked SUV, now receding into the rainy darkness. "What about Tanner himself? Will the boundary keep him out too?" Elena's expression grew troubled as she carefully resheathed the dagger in a tooled leather scabbard. "Temporarily. A sealing this powerful will hold for perhaps a day, no more. And the Strigoi knows other ways into the territory, older paths, secret ways that even I may not be aware of." Daniel uncurled cautiously from his position on the floorboard, brushing fragments of safety glass from his hair and shoulders. "Those weren't ordinary gunmen," he observed with remarkable calm for someone who had just survived their first supernatural car chase. "Their eyes. I saw them when they got close, like animals reflecting headlights, but red." "Thralls," Elena confirmed. "Humans partially transformed by the Strigoi's power, not fully vampire, but no longer entirely human either. Slaves to their master's will, enhanced with a fraction of his strength and speed. And utterly expendable," William added grimly, thinking of the crashed vehicle behind them. Tanner sacrificed them without hesitation, knowing they'd likely fail. "A probing attack to test our defenses, our responses, and to determine if we truly had alliance with the last Blackwood Alpha," Elena said, her amber eyes studying William's profile in the dim light of the dashboard. "The Strigoi now knows for certain that you have claimed your heritage, that you stand with your pack, that you intend to oppose its plans." The remainder of the drive passed in tense silence, each occupied with their own thoughts as the truck wound deeper into Blackwood territory. The rain gradually diminished as they approached Jack's cabin, reduced to a gentle patter against the metal roof that seemed almost soothing after the violence of the storm and the attack. Lights gleamed through the trees as they rounded the final bend, revealing the cabin illuminated from within. 3 figures stood on the porch, their postures alert, watchful. William recognized Marcus immediately, the beta's powerful silhouette unmistakable even in human form. The other 2 were pack members he had met after his first transformation. Lydia, a fierce woman in her 30s with combat experience from multiple tours in Afghanistan, And Rowan, younger but already showing the instinctive tactical awareness that marked him as a potential future beta. William parked the truck beside the cabin, noting with grim satisfaction the defensive positions his pack had established without need for explicit instruction. The wolf in him approved of their initiative, their anticipation of his needs and priorities. "Alpha," Marcus greeted as they exited the vehicle, his deep voice respectful but tense with awareness of danger. His gaze flickered to Daniel, nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the diluted Blackwood blood. "Your nephew?" William nodded, one hand resting protectively on Daniel's shoulder. "Daniel Blackwood, Thomas's son. He stands with us." The statement was both introduction and declaration of protection, establishing Daniel's position within the pack hierarchy despite his inability to transform. Marcus nodded solemnly, accepting William's judgment without question. "We felt the boundary activation, sensed the threat. The others are patrolling the perimeter, watching for incursion. Thralls attacked us on the road," William explained as they moved toward the cabin's entrance. "Elena sealed the boundary against them, but it won't hold Tanner himself for long." He surveyed the clearing around the cabin, his enhanced vision penetrating the darkness beneath the ancient trees. "We need to establish a defensive position here, secure location for planning, for Daniel's protection while we move against the Strigoi." "Already begun, Alpha," Marcus replied, gesturing to the cabin. "We've reinforced doors and windows, established sight lines, prepared escape routes if needed." He turned to Elena with a respectful inclination of his head. "The stones are placed as you instructed, Guardian, awaiting your activation." Elena nodded her approval, patting the leather satchel that contained her magical supplies. "Good. I'll establish the inner ward lines immediately. They'll provide additional protection, especially during daylight hours when your powers are diminished." They entered the cabin, the interior transformed from when William had left it hours earlier. The main room had been organized into what effectively amounted to a command center, maps of Shadowcrest and the surrounding forest pinned to one wall, marked with symbols indicating territory boundaries, pack patrol routes, suspected Strigoi activity sites. A communications setup with satellite phones and a police scanner. Weapons arranged on a side table. Conventional firearms alongside more specialized implements, including silver knives, crossbows with peculiar metal-tipped bolts, and what appeared to be grenades filled with a clear liquid. "Holy water bombs," Marcus explained, following William's gaze to the unusual ordnance. "Not fatal to the Strigoi, but painful, disorienting. Buys time in close combat." William absorbed the preparations with growing appreciation for his pack's capabilities. They had functioned without an alpha for decades, maintaining vigilance, developing tactics, preserving knowledge that humans had relegated to the realm of fantasy and folklore. "You've done well," he said, the simple praise carrying greater impact through the pack bonds than effusive commendation would have among humans. He felt Marcus's satisfaction radiate through their connection, along with the beta's genuine relief at having the alpha's leadership after so many years of bearing that burden alone. "The pack remembers its purpose," Marcus replied simply. "Even without the alpha, the blood knows." Elena moved around the cabin's perimeter, placing small cloth bundles similar to those she had given Daniel at strategic locations, above doors and windows, in corners, beneath furniture. As each was positioned, she murmured words in that ancient language William had heard during the boundary sealing, her fingertips brushing each bundle in a gesture that seemed part benediction, part activation. Daniel watched the proceedings with scholarly fascination, already pulling a small notebook from his pocket to document what he was witnessing. The academic in him remained present even in crisis, observing, cataloging, seeking to understand the supernatural reality he had spent a lifetime researching. "These are Romanian protection wards," he said, examining one of the bundles before Elena placed it. "Similar to those described in Carpathian folk traditions from the 16th century. But you've modified them somehow." Elena glanced at him with surprised approval. "Your grandmother taught you well. Yes, the base patterns are from my homeland, but adapted to this land, these trees, these spirits." She completed the placement of the final bundle, then moved to the center of the room. "Now stand back. The activation requires concentration." The pack members moved to the edges of the room, William guiding Daniel with him, maintaining a protective position slightly in front of his nephew. Elena closed her eyes, raising her hands palm outward as she began to chant in that mysterious ancient tongue. The air in the cabin grew heavy, charged with unseen energy that made the hairs on William's arms stand up, the wolf within alert and watchful, but not threatened. The cloth bundles began to glow faintly, first with a subtle phosphorescence barely visible to ordinary human sight, then with increasing brightness until they illuminated the cabin with a soft, blue-white radiance that cast no shadows. Lines of force became visible between the bundles, forming a complex geometric pattern that encompassed the entire structure. For one breathtaking moment, the pattern flared to eye-searing brilliance, then subsided to a barely perceptible shimmer that quickly faded from visible spectrum altogether. Elena lowered her hands, swaying slightly with the effort of the working. Without conscious thought, William moved to her side, his arm slipping around her waist to steady her. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, a connection that transcended the physical, that resonated with something ancient and powerful in his transformed nature. She looked up at him, those amber eyes reflecting momentary surprise before softening with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. For a heartbeat, they remained thus, connected by more than simple touch, the Alpha and the Guardian, their shared history of protecting this land binding them in ways William was only beginning to understand. "Thank you," she said softly, regaining her strength, but making no move to break their contact. "The wards are established. Nothing tainted by the Strigoi can enter now without triggering alarms that both you and I will sense immediately." William nodded, reluctantly releasing her as he became conscious of the others watching their interaction with varying degrees of interest and speculation. "How long will they hold?" "Against thralls indefinitely," Elena replied, smoothing her dress with a composed gesture that belied the intensity of their momentary connection. "Against the Strigoi itself, perhaps 3 days, less if it brings significant power to bear." "Then we have 3 days to formulate a plan of attack," William said, turning to address the gathered pack members. 3 days to move from defense to offense, to take the fight to Tanner before he can consolidate his position in Shadowcrest. Marcus nodded, approval radiating through the pack bond. "The others will return from patrol by dawn. We can begin strategy sessions then, with the full pack present." "In the meantime," Lydia spoke up, her voice carrying the crisp precision of her military background, "we should secure whatever intelligence assets are available." She nodded toward Daniel. "Your research materials from town, and anything else Jack Holloway might have hidden here that we haven't yet discovered." Daniel straightened at this reference to his work, his academic demeanor giving way to something more determined, more reminiscent of the Blackwood lineage he carried. "I documented everything I found about North Star development, patterns of disappearances at their previous resort locations, financial irregularities, council members who changed votes after private meetings." He gestured to the cabin around them. "And Jack said he had evidence hidden throughout this place. We only found what was in the fireplace so far." "Then that's our first priority," William decided. "Search the cabin thoroughly, find whatever Jack hid, combine it with Daniel's research to build a complete picture of what we're facing." He turned to Marcus. "Can you send someone in to retrieve Daniel's materials from his apartment? Someone who can move undetected, avoid any surveillance Tanner might have established?" Marcus considered for a moment, then nodded. "Kira. She's our best scout, silent, nearly invisible when she chooses to be, and her human form attracts little attention, just another college student as far as most townspeople know." "Good. Have her ready to move at first light. Daniel will provide details on where to find his research materials." William rolled his shoulders, feeling the accumulated tension of the day's revelations and confrontations. "For now, we begin searching here. Every hiding place, every loose floorboard, every hollow wall space. Jack was thorough, paranoid even. He wouldn't have kept all his evidence in one location." The pack dispersed to their assignments with disciplined efficiency, accepting William's leadership with a naturalness that still surprised him. Decades of denying his heritage, yet the mantle of Alpha settled onto his shoulders as though tailor-made, the responsibilities feeling not like burdens, but like puzzle pieces clicking into their ordained spaces. Elena touched his arm lightly, drawing his attention. "While they search, there is something you should see." Her expression was solemn, her eyes holding a weight of history that reminded him forcefully of her true age. "Something your grandfather left for you, that I've kept safe until your return." William followed her to what had once been Jack's bedroom, transformed now into the sleeping quarters he had used earlier that day. Elena moved to the closet, reaching up to the top shelf to retrieve a small wooden box William hadn't noticed during his previous occupation of the room. The box was intricately carved with the now familiar wolf head crest of the Blackwood lineage, the wood darkened with age but lovingly maintained. "Caleb gave this to me the night before he faced the Strigoi," Elena said quietly, setting the box on the small bedside table. "He knew he might not return, knew the Alpha power would seek you out, even across the distance you had placed between yourself and your heritage." William stared at the box, feeling a complex surge of emotions: grief for the grandfather he had abandoned, guilt for the responsibilities he had fled, curiosity about what final message might have been left for him. "He never blamed you," Elena said softly, seeming to read the emotions in his face. "Never stopped believing you would return when the time was right, when the blood called strongly enough to overcome your denial." William took a deep breath, steadying himself, then opened the box. Inside lay 3 items: a folded letter yellowed with age, a small leather pouch, and a photograph he recognized immediately. Himself and Thomas as boys, flanking their stern-faced but proud grandfather, all 3 standing before the cabin that now served as their headquarters. The last picture ever taken of them together, before Vietnam, before William's flight from his heritage, before everything changed. With hands that trembled slightly despite his strength, William unfolded the letter, recognizing his grandfather's distinctive handwriting immediately. "William," it began without preamble, in the direct manner that had characterized Caleb Blackwood in life. "If you are reading this, then I have fallen in battle with the ancient enemy of our blood. The Strigoi that has hunted the Blackwood line for generations has claimed another victim, but not the final victory it seeks. You ran from your legacy, from the power in your blood, from the responsibilities of the Alpha. I understood this choice better than you knew. Each generation of Blackwood men has wrestled with the burden of what we are, what we must do. Some embrace it readily, others fight against it. But the blood always wins in the end. The territory calls its protector home when the need is greatest. In the pouch, you will find your grandmother's wedding ring. Elena knows its significance, its power. When you find a mate worthy of standing beside the Blackwood Alpha, this ring will bind her to you, to the pack, to the territory itself. Choose wisely, for this bond transcends ordinary human marriage. It is a melding of souls, of purposes, of destinies. Know that I never stopped believing in you, William. Never stopped seeing in you the true Alpha that would one day rise to claim his birthright. The path ahead will be difficult. The Strigoi is ancient, patient, cunning. It will strike at what you love, what you protect, seeking to break your spirit before claiming your territory. Stand firm. Trust the pack. Trust Elena. Trust the blood that flows in your veins, the legacy of 300 years of Blackwood Alphas who have guarded this land against darkness. You were always my hope, William, always the strongest of my line, even when you could not see it yourself. The Alpha endures, the pack survives, the blood remembers. Your grandfather, Caleb Blackwood William, lowered the letter slowly, emotion threatening to overwhelm the composure he had maintained through supernatural revelations, werewolf transformations, and vampire attacks. This simple communication from the grandfather he had abandoned, expressing not condemnation but understanding, not disappointment but enduring faith, struck deeper than any accusation could have. "He wrote this the night before he died?" William asked, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. Elena nodded, her own expression solemn with remembered grief. He knew the confrontation with the Strigoi might be his last. He was not young, not at full strength, but the creature had killed your parents, was threatening the territory. He could not allow that to continue, even knowing the likely cost. William opened the small leather pouch, tipping its contents into his palm. His grandmother's ring caught the lamplight, a simple band of gold with a small emerald that had always reminded him of the deep green of the forest in summer. He remembered it on her finger during his childhood, remembered how it had remained there even after her death, buried with her, as was Blackwood tradition. How did he recover this? William asked, confused. It was buried with her. He didn't recover it, Elena replied. This is its twin. Caleb commissioned it specifically, infused it with the same magics, the same connections to the territory. One ring to bind the Alpha to his power, one to bind his mate to his purpose. Her amber eyes held his with quiet intensity. Your grandmother understood her role, embraced it fully. She was the heart of the pack while Caleb was its strength. Together they maintained balance that neither could have achieved alone. William closed his hand around the ring, feeling its subtle warmth against his palm, sensing the latent power it contained. Different from his own ring, yet complementary, designed to create a completed circuit of energy and purpose. And now you suggest I need the same, he said, unable to keep a hint of defensiveness from his tone. A mate, at my age, in the midst of supernatural war. Elena's expression remained serene despite his resistance. I suggest nothing. I merely explain what Caleb intended, what the territory itself may require for optimal defense. Her voice softened slightly. The Alpha draws strength from many sources. The pack bonds, the sacred ground, ancient magics. But the mate bond is unique in its power, its completeness. It anchors the Alpha to his humanity, even as it enhances his wolf nature. Before William could respond, a shout from the main room interrupted their conversation. Alpha, you need to see this! William tucked the ring back into its pouch and moved swiftly to the door, Elena following close behind. In the main room, Rowan stood beside the cold fireplace, a section of the stone hearth removed to reveal a hidden compartment larger than the one William had discovered earlier. Inside lay a metal lockbox, its surface scratched and dented, as though it had been handled roughly, but its lock still intact. Rowan stepped aside respectfully as William approached, allowing the Alpha first access to the discovery. The lockbox bore no key, only a combination dial of the sort found on small safes. William knelt before it, considering. Jack would have used a combination he could remember easily, something significant. Try 111068, Daniel suggested from where he stood watching. The day you both shipped out to Vietnam. He used it for everything, phone passwords, email accounts, his house alarm. William rotated the dial to the suggested numbers, and the lock clicked open with well-maintained precision. Inside lay several items, a thick manila folder stuffed with documents, a small digital voice recorder, a USB drive, and what appeared to be a small leather-bound journal. Daniel moved forward eagerly, recognizing the items. That's it. That's what Jack and I were working on. Records of disappearances at previous North Star resort locations, financial transfers from offshore accounts to local officials, environmental impact reports that were suppressed. He lifted the voice recorder. And this. Jack interviewed former employees from North Star developments in Idaho and Montana. People who witnessed strange occurrences, who lost friends or family members to animal attacks during construction phases. William leafed through the manila folder, scanning documents with the rapid assessment of a career detective. This is evidence of a pattern spanning at least 20 years, North Star moving from small town to small town, building resorts, creating isolated communities where people could disappear without attracting too much attention. He looked up at Daniel. Jack was building a RICO case, organized criminal enterprise across state lines. He couldn't go to the FBI directly, Daniel explained. Not with Sheriff Tanner controlling local law enforcement, monitoring communications. He needed someone outside Shadowcrest, someone with law enforcement connections, but no ties to the local power structure. He met William's gaze meaningfully. He needed you. The implications settled heavily onto William's shoulders. Jack hadn't reached out after decades of silence merely because of supernatural threats or old legends. He had identified a very real, documentable criminal enterprise operating within the structure of normal human society. The Strigoi wasn't just hunting supernatural prey. It was building an infrastructure for sustained feeding using the mechanisms of capitalism and corruption as cover. "This changes our approach," Williams said, addressing the assembled pack members. "This gives us leverage in the human world, ways to attack North Star's operation that don't require direct confrontation with the Strigoi itself." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Cut off its resources, its protection, its feeding ground before it's fully established." "Exactly. We fight on two fronts, supernatural and legal." William turned to Daniel. "Your research, combined with Jack's evidence. How quickly could you organize it into something presentable to federal authorities? Something that would trigger an investigation regardless of local interference?" Daniel considered the question with scholarly thoroughness. "With what I already have at my apartment, plus this 48 hours, maybe 36 if I work straight through." "You'll have help," William assured him, "and protection while you work. This is now our primary objective. Building the case that can dismantle North Star's operation through human legal channels while we prepare for direct confrontation with Tanner on the supernatural front." Elena had been examining the documents over William's shoulder, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "There is something else here," she said, tapping a financial record with one slender finger. "These transfers to consulting services through a shell company called Blackwater Holdings. The amount, the timing." William followed her indication, studying the document more carefully. Regular payments of substantial amounts flowing from North Star through multiple intermediary companies before reaching this final destination. "What about them?" "Blackwater Holdings was established 50 years ago," Elena said quietly, "by a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona. The sole beneficiary is listed only by initials in these documents, but—" Her amber eyes met his, grave with the weight of her suspicion. "W.B. William Blackwood." The implication struck him with physical force, a coldness spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the night air seeping through the cabin's imperfect insulation. "That's impossible. I've never heard of this company, never received payments from North Star or any associated entity." "Could someone be using your identity?" Marcus suggested, his protective instincts flaring at the potential threat to his alpha's reputation. "The Strigoi has proven skilled at assuming human disguises, manipulating human systems." "Or it could be legitimate," came a new voice from the cabin doorway. William turned sharply, the pack members moving with preternatural speed to defensive positions around Daniel and the evidence cache. Standing in the open doorway, silhouetted against the pre-dawn light now beginning to filter through the trees, was a man William had not seen in nearly 2 decades. Michael Blackwood, his son. At 46, Michael had grown into a man who strongly resembled William at the same age, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same steel-blue eyes, though his hair remained dark brown with only touches of silver at the temples. He wore an expensive suit beneath a raincoat that bore evidence of the night's storm, and his expression held a complex mixture of emotions, wariness, determination, and something that might have been regret. "Hello, Dad," he said simply, his gaze taking in the transformed cabin interior, the assembled pack members, the evidence spread across the table. "It seems we have a lot to talk about." William stood frozen, the shock of his son's unexpected appearance momentarily overriding even his alpha instincts. Michael had been estranged since William's retirement from the police force, their last conversation a bitter argument about William's decision to move to Arizona rather than relocate closer to Michael's family in Seattle. Nearly 20 years of silence, broken only by the occasional birthday card or Christmas greeting exchanged with formal politeness and little genuine connection. "Michael," William finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "How did you find me here?" "I have resources," Michael replied with the faintest hint of his former defiance. "When you didn't answer your phone for 3 days, I got worried. Called the retirement community in Arizona. They said you'd left suddenly for Oregon, for a funeral." His gaze hardened slightly. "What they didn't explain is why my father, who hasn't set foot in Oregon for 50 years, would suddenly return for a funeral, then disappear into the mountains without telling his only son." The accusation hung in the air between them, decades of unresolved tensions adding weight to the words. William felt the pack's uncertainty radiating through their bonds. Their alpha's son, but not pack, not transformed, yet carrying the bloodline that might respond to the territory's call if given the opportunity. "It's complicated," William said inadequately, then straightened his shoulders, finding his alpha presence once more. "But you're right. We have a lot to talk about, starting with what you know about Blackwater Holdings and why your name is in these financial records linked to North Star Development." Michael's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "My name? Those payments are going to you, Dad. Have been for decades. The quarterly deposits into your account from private investments you never discussed? That's Blackwater Holdings. That's North Star." His voice took on a harder edge. "That's blood money from the company that's been destroying small towns across the western states for a generation." William stared at his son, the implications cascading through his mind with nauseating clarity. The comfortable retirement he had built in Arizona, the investments that had seemed to perform so well despite economic downturns, the financial security he had taken for granted, all potentially funded by the very creature he now stood against. "I never knew," he said, the truth of it evident in his voice. "Never investigated the source, just accepted the explanations from the financial advisor your mother recommended before she died." "Carlton Reed," Michael supplied, his expression grim, "who conveniently disappeared 3 years ago after questions were raised about some of his other clients' portfolios. No body ever found, just an empty house and a lot of shredded documents." Another victim of the Strigoi, William realized. Another loose end eliminated when it no longer served Tanner's purpose. "You've been investigating North Star," he said. Not a question, but a recognition of the determined intelligence that had always characterized his son, even during their worst disagreements. Michael nodded, some of the tension leaving his posture as the conversation shifted to factual ground. "For the past 5 years, ever since they tried to build a resort near the neighborhood where Emma and the kids and I lived in Seattle, I discovered environmental violations, traced them back to the parent company, started following the money." He gestured to the documents spread across the table. "Found exactly what your friend Jack was documenting. A pattern of corruption, environmental destruction, and unexplained disappearances that follows North Star wherever they build." "And the connection to me?" William prompted, already suspecting the answer. "I didn't make that connection until about 6 months ago," Michael admitted. "Blackwater Holdings was well hidden, designed to obscure the money trail. When I finally broke through the corporate veil and found your name—" He paused, the pain of that discovery evident in his expression. "I thought you were involved, compromised somehow, that maybe your years in law enforcement had changed you." The accusation cut deeply, but William recognized the logic behind it. From Michael's perspective, with limited information and the evidence before him, it was a reasonable conclusion. Painful, but reasonable. "I wasn't involved," William said firmly. "Not knowingly, but I have been used. The creature behind North Star has been playing a very long game." Michael's eyebrows rose at the unusual phrasing. "Creature? What exactly do you mean by that?" William exchanged glances with Elena, a silent communication passing between them. How much to reveal? How quickly? Michael was his son, carried the Blackwood bloodline, but had shown no signs of transformation potential, had been raised entirely separate from the supernatural heritage that was now reasserting itself so powerfully in William's life. Before William could decide how to proceed, the decision was made for him. A howl split the pre-dawn stillness, coming from the forest edge, the alarm signal of a pack member on patrol. It was followed immediately by another, then a third, each carrying the same urgent message through their supernatural connection. Intruder, territory breach, Strigoi. The pack members in the cabin tensed, already moving toward weapons, toward defensive positions, the change shimmering beneath their human forms as they prepared to shift at their alpha's command. Elena moved swiftly to the windows, checking the integrity of her magical wards with focused intensity. "What the hell was that?" Michael demanded, his composure cracking for the first time since his arrival. "Those didn't sound like normal wolves." "They're not normal wolves," William said, making his decision. There was no time for gradual revelation, for careful explanation. The attack was coming, and his son stood in the middle of it, unprepared, unaware, vulnerable. "And we're not just fighting corrupt businessmen or crooked officials." He held up his hand, the silver ring catching the dawn light streaming through the cabin windows. For a moment, he simply stood there, allowing Michael to see him clearly. Not as the aging father who had retreated to Arizona in solitary retirement, but as what he had become, what he had always been beneath the denial and the distance. Then he let the change begin. Not the full transformation, but enough to demonstrate the truth beyond any possibility of denial. His eyes shifted from steel blue to luminous gold, the pupils contracting to vertical slits before expanding again. His teeth lengthened visibly, canines extending into points designed for tearing flesh. The silver-gray hair at his temples seemed to thicken, to take on the texture of fur rather than human hair. "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered, stumbling back a step, his face pale with shock. "Dad, what are you?" "I am what the Blackwood men have always been," William replied, his voice deeper, rougher with the partial transformation. "Guardian of this territory. Protector against creatures that humans have relegated to myth and nightmare." He gestured to the assembled pack members, to Elena with her ancient eyes and magical powers, to Daniel watching with the fascination of someone seeing confirmation of lifelong research. "We stand between Shadowcrest and a darkness that would consume it. A darkness that has been manipulating both of us for decades, trying to weaken the bloodline that is its only true opposition in this territory." Michael stared, his rational mind visibly struggling with the evidence before his eyes. "Werewolves," he said finally, the word emerging as half question, half statement of the inescapable conclusion. "You're all werewolves." "Yes," William confirmed simply. "And the enemy we face is what humans would call a vampire. A strigoi. It controls North Star development. It killed Jack Holloway. It's been hunting our family for generations." He let the partial transformation recede, returning to fully human appearance as he stepped toward his son. "And now it knows we've discovered its plan. It's coming, Michael, right now."